This is a presentation of Chippewa Valley Community Television. The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.
VA Hospital Investigation. Congress hears testimony on Tomah VA Hospital. Recorded Tomah, Wisconsin, March 30th, 2015.
This joint field hearing of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs and the House Committee on Veterans Affairs called to order. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by thanking Chairman Miller of the House Veterans Affairs Committee for his collaboration and leadership in holding today's hearing. I would also like to thank all of our colleagues for their participation. Today's hearing has been called to examine the disturbing allegations surrounding the Veterans Affairs Medical Center here in Tomah. The primary goal of this hearing and of all of our future actions is to help prevent tragedies like the ones we will hear about today from happening to other veterans and their families. I first became aware of the problems of the Tomah VA following news reports in January of this year. I immediately assigned committee staff to launch an investigation into what had occurred and was occurring at Tomah and the VA's reaction to it. Here's what we have found so far. In April 2003, Dr. David Houlihan was disciplined by the Iowa Board of Medicine for having an inappropriate relationship with a psychiatric patient. According to the executive director of the Board of Medicine, the sanction should have been serious concern for any future employer. In 2004, Dr. Houlihan was hired as a psychiatrist at the Tomah VA Medical Center. In August 2005, Dr. Houlihan became chief of staff of the Tomah Medical Center. In November 2007, Craig Farrington, a veteran who sought treatment at the Tomah facility for medication management, died from a lethal mixture of drugs. Autopsy reports showed Mr. Farrington had 7 drugs in his system. In April 2009, it was known and documented by employees of the Tomah VA that many of Dr. Houlihan's patients called him, quote, the Candy Man. And they were concerned that veterans were, quote, prescribed large quantities of narcotics. Again, that was April 2009, almost 6 years ago. In June 2009, Dr. Noelle Johnson was fired from Tomah for refusing to fill prescriptions that she believed to be unsafe. Dr. Johnson had raised concerns to her superiors, had sought guidance from the Iowa Medical Licensing Board, and later spoke to the Drug Enforcement Administration about Dr. Houlihan. In July 2009, Dr. Chris Kirkpatrick was fired from Tomah. Dr. Kirkpatrick had raised concerns to his union about over-medication at Tomah. Tragically, later in the day of his termination, Dr. Kirkpatrick committed suicide. In August of 2011, the VA Office of Inspector General received an anonymous complaint about overprescription and retaliation by Dr. Houlihan at Tomah. In March 2012, a second anonymous complaint was filed with the IG against Dr. Houlihan. The Office of Inspector General examined 32 separate allegations during its 2.5-year-long inspection. In March of 2014, the Office of Inspector General finished its inspection of Tomah and administratively closed the case without making it public. On August 30th, 2014, Jason Simkuski died in the Tomah Mental Health Wing as a result of, quote, mixed drug toxicity. Simkuski was a patient of Dr. Houlihan's. His autopsy revealed he had over a dozen different medications in his system. In September 2014, Ryan Honnell began lodging whistleblower complaints about patient safety and quality of care at Tomah. On January 8th of 2015, this year, the Center for Investigative Reporting published an article detailing overprescription and retaliation at Tomah. The article revealed that veterans and employees referred to the Tomah VA Medical Center as, quote, Candyland. On January 12, 2015, Candace Dallas brought her father, Thomas Bayer, to the Tomah VA Urgent Care Center with stroke-like symptoms. Mr. Bayer waited for over 2 hours for attention. That day, the facility's only CT scanner was down for routine preventive maintenance. Mr. Bayer passed away 2 days later. On February 6, 2015, the Office of Inspector General finally posted its Tomah Healthcare Inspection Report on its website. We continue to gather the facts about what occurred at Tomah. Our investigation is far from over. Revelations of the problems at Tomah have prompted additional whistleblowers to contact our committee with information that indicates systemic problems within the VA healthcare system. It is important to acknowledge and thank the members of the media that have uncovered, reported, and highlighted the problems within the VA healthcare system. Without a free press, few, if any, of these problems would have ever seen the light of day. Legislatively, this hearing is just the first step. In order to solve a problem, we must fully understand it and be willing to admit we have one. To that end, today we will hear from surviving family members, former employees, and representatives from the VA and the VA Office of Inspector General. Tragically, we will hear stories of two families, the Simkuski and the Bear families, who lost loved ones during their treatment at the Tomah facility. They have many questions, and they have a right to have those questions answered. I want to convey this Joint Committee's sincere condolences to the family members and friends of Jason Simkuski and Thomas Bear and Craig Farrington and Dr. Kirkpatrick. We thank them for being here today so that Wisconsin and the American people can hear their stories firsthand. The lack of public knowledge and scrutiny of the problems, not only at Tomah, but at other VA healthcare facilities, indicates the transparency and accountability, both within the VA and the VA Office of Inspector General, must be improved. As the last 2 months have shown, the crucial first step in improving service and quality of care in the VA healthcare system is a process for transparent disclosure. In spite of the revelations regarding the Tomah facility, I still believe that the vast majority of men and women working in Wisconsin's VA facilities are dedicated to providing quality care to the finest among us. Nevertheless, the VA and the VA Office of Inspector General must take necessary steps to ensure that substandard clinical practices and the retaliatory tactics used at Tomah never occur or go unreported again. We owe our veterans the best possible treatment and care. Hopefully, with proper oversight, increased transparency, and swift accountability within the VA, that goal will be achieved. Chairman Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jeff Miller, Chairman of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. I am from the 1st District of Florida, and while I'm here under circumstances that are disturbing, to say the least, I'm grateful to be in Tomah with each and every one of you this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, those of us up here on the dais right now are from different political parties, different houses of Congress, different parts of this state and different parts of the country. But let me say this. We are all united here in Tomah today because partisanship, stovepipes, and gridlock have no place where our nation's veterans are concerned. Let me begin my statement by expressing my condolences to the Simkuski family and the Bear family, and to all of you here today who have lost loved ones or have been left to carry the scars of poor treatment by the Tomah Department of Veterans Medical Center. However, let me assure you that your pain serves a purpose and your calls for help and change have been heard. Concerned employees and worried veterans have tried to blow the whistle here for years, only to be met with seemingly silence by the Inspector General and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And when the problems finally got the attention that they deserved, the IG and the VA learned what so many here had known and been saying for a long time, that some providers were recklessly providing opioids and other high-risk medications that in some cases were actually harming veteran patients, and that facility and VISN leaders allowed a culture of fear, reprisal, and retribution to fester until it infected staff morale and impacted patient care. Unfortunately, many of the issues surrounding medication management and lack of accountability that we're going to discuss today are not outliers, but they are symptoms of system-wide issues that our veterans and their families face in communities like this one every single day. I recognize that pain, particularly the chronic pain and accompanying comorbid conditions that many of our veterans experience, is complex and difficult to treat. I also recognize that VA is joined by the medical community at large in grappling with how to best treat chronic pain and ensure safe, effective use of opioids and other high-risk medications. However, I have heard VA officials use these two facts as de facto excuses for irresponsible medication management practices and systemic lack of accountability for far too long. While our veterans and their families continue to suffer the devastating consequences of VA's inaction, it's time for a new message. We cannot rewind the clock and bring to light before yet another year of inaction passed the results of the IG's initial 3-year investigation that found serious concerns. We can never bring back Jason Simkuski or Thomas Baer, but we can use the lessons we learned here in Tomah to improve the care our veterans receive and ensure that no other veterans, their families, or VA employees suffer like some have here. I appreciate each and every one of you being here today. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Before I turn it over to Senator Baldwin, I do ask unanimous consent to enter all of our opening statements in the record. And our ranking member, Senator Tom Carper, has also offered an opening statement that I'd also ask be entered in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Chairman Miller, for holding this hearing here today. And to my congressional colleagues in the Wisconsin delegation, thank you for joining us. And a special welcome to Congressman Walz and Congressman Abraham for visiting Wisconsin today. I want to echo the opening statement of Chairman Miller by noting that the fact that there are members here from both parties, from both the Senate and the House, sends an important message to this community that we share a bipartisan commitment to get to the bottom of the problems at the Tomah VA and to work together across party lines to make sure that they never happen again. I hope and I trust that I speak for all of us when I say there is no reason for and no room for politics when it comes to ensuring that our nation's veterans receive the timely, safe, and highest quality care that they have earned. I would also like to take an opportunity to say thank you to our panelists for joining us here today. In particular, I have tremendous respect for the courage of Candace, Heather, Marv, Ryan, and Noel. Stories that you are going to share today are extremely powerful. They're stories of a sacred trust that we must have with our veterans and their families, and stories of how that trust has been broken. Tragic stories of loss. Today, we are here to fix what's been broken and to work together to restore that trust. And I want you to know that the stories you give voice to today will help us do that for our veterans. The problems at the Tomah VA are both sobering and have had tragic consequences. Going back to 2006, veterans who were patients at the Tomah VA have tragically lost their lives. Veterans who served our country, Angela Colby, Michael Boback, Jacob Ward, Derek McGovern, Craig Farrington, and Jason Simkuski were all under the care of the former Tomah Chief of Staff and treated with prescription drugs, and all of them subsequently died of a drug overdose. In fact, according to his sister Carrie, who is with us here today, Mr. Farrington, an Army veteran from De Pere, Wisconsin, died from a lethal mixture of prescription drugs in 2007 while under the care of the former Chief of Staff, the same cause of death that would tragically take the life of Jason Simkuski some 7 years later. These are 6 examples of a larger problem that is in desperate need of solutions today. As we all know, after 2 decade-long wars, a large number of our service members are coming home with the damage of combat. Our veterans and their families are facing the difficult challenge of facing physical injuries and PTSD and other mental illnesses. We must confront these problems more aggressively and more effectively and help them meet that challenge. I believe the VA's over-reliance on opioids has resulted in getting our veterans hooked instead of getting them help. Overprescription of opioids at the VA is clearly a root problem, but we must not lose sight of the fact that it is growing into a weed of addiction whose impact is being felt beyond the VA walls. The devastation of addiction on families in our communities that is being grown at the VA is stunning. Reports indicate that 6 years ago, a Marine Corps veteran was stoned on painkillers and tranquilizers from the Tomah VA while driving and killed a 6-week-old child, Ada Mae Miller. As the Center for Investigative Reporting wrote about the Tomah VA Medical Center, quote, Ada Mae's death is one of dozens of tragedies that begin to hint at how the flood of narcotics from the VA scarred this region. The fact is, the problem of overprescribing at the VA and the collateral damage of addiction is not unique to Wisconsin. We are not alone. The ripples are indeed being felt across America in communities we work for every day in Washington, D.C. The families we have a responsibility to represent are struggling with the loss of a husband or wife, son or daughter, father or mother, sister or brother, to addiction whose root is planted within the VA system. It is our job to make sure that they don't feel alone, and I believe we have a shared responsibility to do everything we can to pull this root out. I thank you for providing me with the opportunity to join you today, and I look forward to continuing my work with this community and my colleagues in Congress to address these problems and put the solutions in place to prevent these problems and tragedies from ever happening again.
Thanks, Senator Baldwin. Congressman Walz.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson and Senator Baldwin. To my colleagues, and a special thank you. It's been an honor of mine to serve with Chairman Miller for the past 8 years on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I can tell you no one brings more passion and integrity to the issues of care for our warriors than the chairman does. I'm Tim Walz. I'm a 24-year veteran of the military, and I serve in the 1st Congressional District of Minnesota, and my district goes up to the Mississippi, and many of my veterans in southeast Minnesota use the Tomah facility. This hearing, and for our witnesses who are here, fulfills our constitutional responsibility to provide oversight and to provide oversight of the VA, and very few committees have the immense responsibility of that oversight means the care of those who are willing to put their lives on the line and the families to serve this nation. So getting it right, as I mentioned to some before this hearing, this is a zero-sum proposition. We understand many get quality care. We understand many are getting what they need. But if one family doesn't receive it, then we have failed. And that is an understanding that amongst this family runs deep. I know each of you, if there was anything we could do, and I say this to you as a father, a husband, a son, and a veteran, if we could turn back and make this right, everyone here would wish that more than anything. But what we can do is 2 things. We can make sure accountability and justice is provided to you, and we can make sure that no other family goes through this. So I echo what my colleague said to each of you. I cannot even imagine your pain, and I will not give you lip service. I spoke with one of Mr. Baer's family members who's a 23-year E8. She is pretty much not interested in lip service, and she's pretty much not interested in a show. She's pretty much interested in results. And I think everyone up here clearly understands that. And so today, the purpose of it is to start to provide you justice, to try and understand exactly what happened, and then to start coming up with solutions. And the issue here runs deep, and it is something, it's not new. It's not confined to the VA, it's in the private sector also. Pain management with injuries, especially injuries associated with catastrophic war injuries or service-related injuries. And this is something we've tried to do. We put in place reaching back decades, and I've worked with Chairman Miller on things we put in to try and address this issue. In 2008, we had a bill dealing with chronic pain management and over-reliance on opioids. It's been there, but for each of your families, what it's telling me, it's not working. My colleague, Mr. Kind, and our colleague from up north, Mr. Ribble, introduced recently a piece of legislation to build on that, to make it even stronger. And so what needs to come out of this today, and what I thank each of you is we need to understand what happened. We need to understand what went wrong. We need to make sure that there's accountability, and if it includes punishment to those and justice for you, that needs to happen. And then we need to find those solutions. We need to implement things that are working. And I hope to hear from the VA today of things they've initiated. And there are bright spots of things that are happening. And that's going to be amongst you. Frustrating at times to hear, but please understand, for us, what you're going to tell us and help us understand is going to ensure that not another family sits there. And I would close with our two folks here sitting at the end, along with the media, as Senator Johnson pointed out, for bringing this to the attention. It is a pretty high calling and a pretty difficult thing to do, to stand up in the face of retribution, to bring things to light that are harming our veterans. And I think, and I've witnessed it in the House Veterans Affairs Committee, the tolerance for retribution on whistleblowers is less than zero, because it is a cancer that prevents us from providing the care that our veterans need. If anyone in that organization is stymied from being able to speak about what is right and what is wrong. And so our commitment to you, as it's always been, is to make sure that justice is served to you, those who were bringing it up. You were not doing it for yourself, you were doing it for their loved ones. And perhaps had we listened earlier, they wouldn't be sitting at the table, because I know they would rather be somewhere else. So I want to thank you for that. I hope we find answers here today. Our republic requires us to have these difficult conversations. Our warriors and their families are absolutely counting on us, and what we cannot do is undermine the faith of the care we're going to give our warriors amongst those who are serving. So I want to thank everyone for being here and thank the chairmen for initiating this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman Walz. Like you, someone who served your country in the military, we have a lot of vets and their families here, so I think I speak for everybody here on this joint committee when we thank you sincerely for your service to this nation. It is the tradition of our Senate committee to swear in all the witnesses, so if all the witnesses would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please be seated. Our first witness is Miss Noelle Johnson. I believe it's Dr. Johnson, is it not?
It is, yep.
I'll say Dr. Johnson. Is a former pharmacist at the Tomah VA Medical Center from 2008 to 2009 and is currently an employee at the VA facility in Iowa. Dr. Johnson.
Okay. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the committee for having this hearing today and allowing me to have a voice and speak out for those veterans.
If you could put the microphone a little bit closer to your, thank you.
Sure. I worked at the Tomah VA as a clinical pharmacy specialist from July of 2008 to June of 2009. I was fired after refusing to fill several narcotic prescriptions prescribed by Dr. Houlihan that I believed to be unsafe. I filed a whistleblower complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, which was denied, and later the Merit System Protection Board. The VA requested federal mediation, and I settled out of court in 2010. I was then fully reinstated. I do believe that I was terminated for blowing the whistle, and I was contacted by the DEA and agreed to interview with them. I met with the DEA in June of 2009, and I was fired a few weeks later. In my Office of Special Counsel complaint, Dr. Houlihan and several others referenced that I had turned him in to the Inspector General. I believe this played into my termination. I truly believe that Dr. Houlihan is a dangerous man, and what makes him so dangerous is a lack of respect for the medication in which he prescribes. Whatever his motives for prescribing the current doses of the medication is almost irrelevant. To this day, I still question his motives, whether it be power, monetary gain, negligence, or ignorance, maybe all of the above. The truth of the matter, the quantities of narcotic medications coming out of the Tomah VA facility is irrefutably unsafe. This has been demonstrated by several cases of overdose and death. Over 2,000 911 calls were made from the Tomah VA Medical Center, with 24 unexpected deaths over 5 years. This is unacceptable. 3 of those deaths occurred in 4-month span time frame in the year that I worked at the Tomah VA. The 3 questions that need to be asked are simple. The first, what makes the Tomah VA patient population so complex, as the Tomah director put it in his television debut, that they require the number of narcotics that are being dispensed? I am currently working as a double board certified clinical pharmacy specialist in a pain management clinic at the Des Moines VA. I am currently the facility lead for the National Opioid Safety Initiative, and I can assure you the patients at the Tomah VA are no more complex than any other patient that I see on a daily basis. At that point, we are not even prescribing 1/4 of the current narcotic medications that the Tomah VA is. Specifically, as the VHA directive is to limit the morphine equivalents to less than 200 milligrams per day and limit the combination of opioids and benzos due to the increased risk of mortality. I do not believe that Tomah would be in compliance with this national directive. The thing I'm struggling most with is to understand the variance between what the Undersecretary's team found and the report that it was administratively closed by the Inspector General. Unfortunately, for all the veterans receiving care at the Tomah VA, the considerable variance that wasn't enough to warrant a serious consideration by the Inspector General, as the investigation was administratively closed, led to continued harm of our nation's veterans. The second thing, what exact type of pain is the Tomah VA trying to treat that they are prescribing the dangerous quantity and dosages of this medication? Studies show that no proven long-term benefit of opioid medications, let alone the significant doses that were being prescribed. As a pain specialist, I can assure you that if someone was actually taking those medications in the amounts that were prescribed, they would have serious side effects or consequences, which leads me to believe, in part, that the veterans are not taking all of the prescribed medications and are at high risk for diversion. This was a substantiated finding by the Inspector General. They substantiated the allegation that negative urine drug screens were not acted on and that controlled substances were prescribed in the face of a negative urine drug screen. The third issue is, why is a psychiatrist prescribing opioid pain medications at the Tomah VA's facility, period? This is beyond their scope of practice. I am tremendously disappointed in our federal system and our current authoritative figures that are to be governing our agencies set in place to protect our veterans and employees. I have interviewed with the DEA 3 times and had a thorough interview with the IG. Of the 32 allegations that were investigated, many were unsubstantiated. What the disturbing thing is that I lived the torture and saw the unsafe practice daily. I can attest to several of those 32 allegations and believe the majority should have been substantiated. The Inspector General's investigation did substantiate several allegations. However, they still did not find any conclusive evidence affirming criminal activity, gross clinical incompetence, or negligence, or administrative practices that were illegal or violated personnel policies. This is unfathomable for the following reasons. I advise that I alerted Dr. Houlihan on a few different narcotic medications and scripts. All were very concerning for safety reasons. However, the one that stands out the most to me is an OxyContin prescription that a local medical doctor was prescribing. He was also tapering this medication because the patient tested inappropriately positive for methadone, a drug that neither provider was prescribing. At that point in time, the patient was double dipping. He was getting OxyContin from the VA and from the local medical doctor, with refill dates only a week or 2 apart. In addition to the inappropriate urine drug screen, which the VA did not obtain, the abuse of opioids, the patient left his cell phone in the pharmacy. The person on the other end was trying to buy medication from this veteran. All of this was documented, and Dr. Houlihan rewrote the prescription for OxyContin 3 times a day. This was an increase in the frequency prescribed. This supports the substantiated findings that Dr. Clancy's team expressed. As expressed above, the veterans that were still prescribed narcotics in face of aberrant drug-related behavior. From a clinical standpoint, I am unclear why Dr. Houlihan prescribes these medications and the manner in which he does. What matters is the standard of care. There is a standard of care that's set in place for providing safe and effective care to our veterans. For example, there was 1,080 immediate-release morphine tablets that were dispensed. When I confronted Dr. Houlihan, he refused to change the patient to a long-acting medication, which would have been standard of care, or adding a non-narcotic medication to treat his neuropathic pain. He continued to prescribe 36 tablets a day to a known substance abuser who was overusing his morphine while in the hospital. Another example is of a prescription of 1,447 milligrams of morphine equivalent per day. Dr. Houlihan and Dr. Hyde worked on this prescription together. The patient had dangerously increased his own medication, and they gave the patient a 30-day supply when he was supposed to be admitted for inpatient facility monitoring for pain management. He was not admitted. That is how you have accidental or non-accidental doses in your parking lot. I retrospectively reviewed the patient's profile the following week, and as I said, he was not admitted according to the plan of care. I was later kicked off the new pain committee and opioid work group that I had been assigned to or appointed by the quality and safety director by Dr. Houlihan, who promptly replaced me with Dr. Hyde, which I do not believe to be a coincidence. Dr. Hyde is now being investigated by the Wisconsin Department of Professional Services. I had very little interaction with Deb Frazier. The only thing I could say is that I heard her say that everyone needed a cocktail, which consisted of an opioid, a benzo, a stimulant, and a sleeping medication. My question about her is, again, if she's treating mental health, then why is she prescribing 5.3 million milligrams of morphine equivalent in 1 year's time frame? What is she treating? When did it become acceptable or the standard of care to treat psychological pain with opioids? This finding was unsubstantiated by the Inspector General. However, I can tell you that I saw this indication for opioids in the chart several times. The veterans in the Tomah VA appeared extremely over-medicated. Several veterans appeared to be suffering with extrapyramidal side effects due to the unsafe combination of medications being prescribed. The list of medications the Tomah VA prescribed Jason Simkoski did not follow evidence-based guidelines or the standard of care. For example, he was prescribed a weak opioid that was prescribed with Suboxone, which should never be done. Diazepam was prescribed at above the maximum recommended dosage. He was also being prescribed duplicate benzodiazepine therapy with diazepam and temazepam, it was dangerous and not the standard of care. He was also on several other interacting medications that affect serotonin, which put him at high risk for serotonin syndrome, which can be lethal, and unfortunately was. One of my main concerns about the care provided at the Tomah VA to Jason was that Jason's care in the mixed drug toxicology that he eventually led to his death did not likely occur overnight. I would have suspected that the veteran would have displayed signs and symptoms of CNS depression, and he likely did. If that was the case, was there evidence of gross clinical incompetence and negligence? That veteran's death was a preventable tragedy. Had the Inspector General done their due diligence and reported their findings despite the administrative closing of the investigation, the outcome for Jason could have been a very different one. Majority of my colleagues, with the exception of Dr. Hyde, had agreed with my clinical concerns. I alerted my chief of pharmacy, Dr. Aaron Naris, who ordered me to illegally partial a methylphenidate script prescribed by Dr. Houlihan because neither of us concurred with the current dosing regimen, and it was prescribed above the maximum recommended dosage. I told my service line chief, Jeff Evanson, and his response to me being asked to do something illegal was, "Why are you trying to cause trouble? Why are you trying to throw Aaron under the bus? If Houlihan wants you to fill that prescription, you have no right to say no." I reported my concerns to the president of the union, the VISN pharmacy leaders, the DEA, and later the Inspector General, as well as the Wisconsin Board of Pharmacy. I alerted my licensing agency, the Iowa Board of Pharmacy, who advised me not to fill the prescriptions and bring the matter to local authorities. The unfortunate part of all of this is that despite all who knew, nothing has been done. The true tragedy is that more veterans had to die because the Office of Special Counsel determined that my clinical opinion was different than Dr. Houlihan's. The depth of this tragedy is far-reaching. I recently received a pain management consultant at the VA in Des Moines for a veteran that was treated by Dr. Houlihan and Deb Frazier. He had a long-standing history of substance abuse. He has previously taken off opioids for a previous overdose. He was later put back on large doses of benzodiazepines and opioids by Dr. Houlihan, and he has subsequently overdosed 2 times in the last 2 months. He is now an inpatient in our facility being taken off all of his medications. I am unclear how the Inspector General could not substantiate the findings that no conclusive evidence of gross clinical incompetence or negligence was found. Veterans lost their lives because of this, a prime example of gross clinical incompetence and negligence. I have personally dealt with the repercussions of the administrative practices that were illegal and violated all sorts of personnel policies. I was asked to do something illegal. I refused. I blew the whistle and was fired for standing up for doing what was safe and right for the veterans. The Inspector General did find that pharmacy staff uniformly indicated that they were reluctant to question any prescription ordered by Dr. Houlihan or that the aberrant behavior by his patients because they feared reprisal. If all of these findings were unsubstantiated, why have so many clinicians left the Tomah VA? The one pharmacist who was brave enough to stand up and question those prescriptions for veterans was fired. The precedence of what not to do if you value your job was set. My second chief of pharmacy, Tom Yeager, reported that he was actually coerced into writing his personal statement that helped lead to my termination. He agreed to take it back, and he resigned 2 days after my termination. My clinical colleague, Heather Ashmus, and Rebecca Bell were pulled into Dr. Houlihan's office, where he essentially told them if they value their job, he would not question him like I did. A former provider resigned in lieu of termination after refusing to write for an opioid that a veteran did not test positive for in his urine drug screen. I was told in the pain committee meeting that we were not to be drug testing our patients, as when they did not test positive for the substance prescribed and we continued to prescribe the medication, then we were liable. I do believe that is the point of the urine drug screen, is to substantiate use and misuse of high-risk medications for the safety of our veterans and the public. Dr. Houlihan proceeded to tell the union steward that there would never be a pain clinic at the VA, and if pharmacy took over management of pain management, then patients would start dying, after which they would bring their guns to pharmacy and start shooting. I continue to have grave concerns about the clinical abilities of several of the providers at the Tomah VA, including concerns that were ignored or unsubstantiated by the Inspector General. What will it take for those in a position of authority to do some significant action? How many veterans' lives need to be lost? We are supposed to be taking care of these veterans returning from war, not creating a war that they will not survive. It is all of our responsibility to stand up for these veterans' safety and not contribute to the tragedy that has cost so many lives. The leadership at all levels, Tomah, VISN, VACO, and the Inspector General, need to be held accountable or true change will never prosper, and veterans will continue to suffer the ultimate sacrifice.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. We will, by the way, enter full written statements into the record. If we could just ask the witnesses to keep pretty close within the 5 minutes so we can keep the hearing moving. Our next witness is Mr. Ryan Honnell. He's a former employee of the Tomah VA Medical Center who works as a secretary in the hospital's mental health clinic. Mr. Honnell.
Chairman Johnson, Chairman Miller, and distinguished members of the committee, as well as the press. I am the one who blew the whistle on the alarming irregularities concerning unethical practice at the Tomah Veterans Affairs Medical Center. I am also a disabled combat veteran who received care at the VA for 15 years up until last year. I enlisted as a combat engineer after high school, served in Desert Storm, earned an appointment to West Point, then became a commissioned infantry officer before being medically discharged with, among other things, PTSD. It is important to note that I was only the spark to set off years of employees raising concerns about the dangerous prescription and distribution of narcotics, as well as the resulting retaliation. The results were to the detriment of the health of veterans and in some cases the deaths of veterans. The system was slow to respond, but quick to silence those who raised concerns. I just wish the whistle I blew would resurrect those who have died due to the mistreatment. Initially, my complaints to the VA Office of Inspector General mainly centered on a hostile work environment that tolerated fraud and abuse. I only briefly mentioned that although I wasn't a witness since I was a secretary to the overprescription of narcotics, there was a widespread concern among my coworkers. I simply stated in my complaint that it should be looked into. There is a culture in the VA where cronyism runs rampant, leaving incompetence in charge at all levels that tolerates unethical practices. Once I came out publicly blowing the whistle, I had current and former employees contact me with information about other unethical activities up to and including patient harm and patient death. There is a lack of accountability in VA leadership. There were years of complaints concerning a retaliatory environment and patient harm. Yet both VA leadership and the VA Office of Inspector General ignored or handed off complaints back to the Tomah facility so it could investigate itself. There is a culture in the VA of admitting no wrongdoing. Pain management and wait times are simply a symptom of a far larger lack of accountability. Tomah is not an island unto itself. Dr. Houlihan should have been held to account years ago by not just facility directors, but those outside of the Tomah facility in Vision 12 leadership, yet the system protected him and not our nation's veterans. The VA Inspector General's office is broken. If it weren't for a FOIA request done by Senator Baldwin's office last summer, no one would have known about the issues in Tomah. It took an investigative journalist, Aaron Glantz, at the Nonprofit Center for Investigative Reporting to do the job that the VA Inspector General was incompetent to do. The report verified everything people had been talking to me about since I blew the whistle: excessive prescribing of narcotics, drug diversion, patients not using their narcotics. A physician in 2009, Dr. Chris Kirkpatrick, who raised concerns about Dr. Houlihan's prescribing practices, was terminated and went home and committed suicide. Tomah Municipal Police reports of veterans selling their medication, retaliation against those who spoke up, concerned about their licenses, such as the 5 pharmacists who spoke with investigators about the dangerous levels and early filling of narcotics and resigned or were terminated. Most incredible to me was a statement about the perception of retaliation, implying that it didn't really exist. Yet numerous people in the report had been forced out of the facility for simply raising concerns on behalf of veterans. Inspector General Griffin said that he wouldn't have done anything different, and no one else would have either. Ms. Gromek stated that the report couldn't be released because of personally identifiable information. The report received through the FOIA request was already redacted. I'll give you 2 personal examples of retaliation even after resigning from the VA. After requesting a patient access report of my electronic medical records, I discovered that a half-dozen Tomah employees had accessed my electronic medical records after I left the facility over a supposed mix-up in Secretary McDonald's office, according to Mario DeSanctis, concerning a complaint about my prescriptions. Although I had never received care or received prescriptions from the Tomah VA, there were a half-dozen Tomah non-pharmacy employees over a pharmacy complaint in my records. I had originally informed my supervisor, Lisa No, that I had a PTSD diagnosis since I was in vocational rehabilitation with the VA, and my counselor in Indiana needed to know information about my employment at the VA. I asked that this remain in confidence. However, as soon as I blew the whistle, I started hearing from coworkers about my instability. Ultimately, the most troubling occurred since everything came out in the media. Dr. Houlihan's attorney sent a letter to me threatening a lawsuit, a man that I reported. In an interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, his attorney, Frank Doherty, alluded to my mental health status, which had nothing to do with my credibility. And it just so happens that Frank Doherty's wife, Lisa Doherty, who is a narcotics compliance officer, reported directly into Dr. Houlihan. Shortly after, while investigators were in the Tomah VA, Police Chief Huffman directed that a police report be done on me by my former supervisor, Lisa No, and 2 coworkers, Leisha Dukes and Rachel Fleming, 4 months after I resigned over a supposed threatening incident that took place while I was an employee before I resigned. You can see the police report that someone leaked to me in my submitted documents. Among the terms used in that report was I was threatening, I was red in the face, I was unstable, and then the word that was the most damaging for mental health professionals in Tomah, that I was crazy. It's in the police report, that word. As long as you speak out, raising concerns, whether an employee or a former employee, the VA will do everything in its power to discredit you. And the OIG will just call it a perception. In conclusion, the greatest problem requiring immediate change is for President Obama to nominate a permanent inspector general and for the Senate to confirm without bipartisan horse trading. The VA Office of Inspector General has the blood of veterans on its hands. Senator Baldwin and Senator Johnson have each asked the White House to nominate a new inspector general. Elected officials need to make sure that when they hear of serious problems in a VA facility, they direct those concerns far higher than the facility level. When, as in Tomah, unethical practices go all the way up to the facility director, sending those concerns back to that facility director only leaves the fox to guard the hen house. As Congressman Kine stated, when he came to the Tomah facility last summer, there wasn't a peep from Mario DeSanctis that there were any problems. Certainly no narcotics problems. Nothing. A VA Inspector General should at minimum provide a summary of problems in a facility. In the case of Tomah, when someone from Congress comes calling, they should already have a top line of any concerning investigations. This Inspector General's office didn't even keep senior VA leadership informed. Again, the main problem underlying scandal after scandal is a culture that lacks accountability. Rogue doctors and those who supervise them will never care what the rules are, or they will never follow a pain management system if they aren't held accountable, has been the case in Tomah. There is a cancer within VA leadership that requires excision, not promotions, not transfers, and not bonuses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honnold. Our next witness is Mr. Marvin Simkuski. Marv is the father of Jason Simkuski, a 35-year-old Marine who passed away of a reported drug overdose at Tomah VA Medical Center. Mr. Simkuski.
Thank you for having me here today. My name is Marv Simkuski. I'm Jason Simkuski's dad. I want to start off by saying that August 30th, 2014 was the hardest and most painful day of my life. There isn't a day that goes by when I don't relive that morning. I regret leaving my son in his room alone that morning, only to get a call hours later that he stopped breathing. I can't get that thought out of my head. I wish I would have been there for him. I love Jason and still do with all my heart and miss him every day. Jason was proud to be a Marine and to serve his country. He loved his fellow Marines. This is a summary of some of the important issues to the committee as I understand them. I really got to know and understand how Jason struggled with his addiction problem, only to have it overfueled time and time again by the Tomah VA doctors. I have argued with Jason's doctors for the last 4 years about them over-medicating him. I was always told that I wasn't their patient, even though I was his dad who truly cared about him. What I would like to know is if Jason was their son, would they have had him on all these medications? When Jason came home from one of his inpatient stays, the doctor had him on so many meds, Jason and I were confused by all the different medications he had to take. His doctor sent him a 3-month supply of lorazepam, and he took them all in 4 days and almost died. I was mad and confused. Why would a doctor that works with patients with addiction problems send a patient 3 months' worth of benzodiazepines? After his doctor stopped the benzodiazepines and eliminated some of the other meds, Jason started doing a lot better, and I started giving him his meds daily, 7 days a week. Then one day, about a year ago, Jason's dog, which he loved, was run over by a car in front of him. Jason started to unravel. I took him back to the Tomah VA, and he was assigned to a new inpatient doctor, Dr. Davis. My wife, Jason, and I met with her and discussed his treatment plan. This new doctor told us that Jason didn't need all these meds, and she was going to take him off most of them. My son stayed at the Tomah VA for 3 months. Towards the end of his 3-month stay in 2014, he was doing real well until his doctor put him on a new drug, Geodon. Then everything started to spiral downhill. Jason's anxiety level went way up. He couldn't sleep. He started having bad thoughts. He told his doctor about all of these issues and that he didn't want to take the medicine anymore. She told him, if you don't take it, you will be discharged the next morning. Jason kept taking it until he couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled the fire alarms and went crazy. His doctor was going to put him in lockdown for 2 months because of it. My son made a good point to me. He said, why am I getting punished for something she made me take? Dr. Davis then gave Jason the option of going to Madison facility or into the lockdown at the Tomah VA. He did not want to go into the lockdown, so he transferred to the Madison VA the same day. He was told there that he was over-medicated on Valium and Geodon, and that the Geodon can make people crazy. They released him the next day. He was sent home to try to wean himself off these medications, which I know is next to impossible. After being home for about 2 weeks, Jason still couldn't do much more than get out of bed and eat. So I took him back to the Tomah VA the day after my father's funeral. Jason wasn't able to attend his grandfather's funeral because of the effects of withdrawal. Jason told me on the way down to Tomah that if he could be like anybody, he would be like his brother Chad, because Chad was normal and he didn't have all these daily struggles. The last 2 weeks that Jason was in Tomah, he was doing okay until his doctor put him back on Geodon. He sent me a text 4 days before he died and told me he couldn't take it anymore. He was going crazy, and he reached out to me to help him. I made various calls to various offices above his doctor's head. Jason called me within 2 hours. He said somebody was helping him. I met with his doctor the next day, Thursday, with my son and a patient advocate. When we sat down in the room, his doctor turned and pointed at me, and she said that I caused her a lot of trouble. She said she spent 2.5 hours in meetings because I went over her head, and she could have been taking care of my son. She also said I may know how to build houses and pound nails, but I don't know anything about taking care of my son. This really hit me hard. To have Jason's doctor tell me I don't know about my son and that I caused her a lot of trouble for trying to help him was difficult to hear. Jason called me that night before he died and wanted me to bring his truck the next morning. He was all excited about coming home that following Monday for his daughter's birthday that week. His wife, his daughter, and I arrived as promised. Usually when we come to see him, he is waiting. This time there was no Jason. I went to the nurse's station and asked where he was, and they said he was in his room with a migraine, which was strange because he never had a migraine before. I went into his room, and he was lying on his side with his hand on his head. I asked him what was the matter, and he started to talk, but I could not understand him because he was on so much medication. I went to the nurse's station and asked them what was wrong with Jason, and the nurse told me that he would be fine in a couple hours. They had given him another med for a migraine. This medication did not show up on the autopsy report. It was Fioricet. I went back to his room, and we stayed a little longer. He waved us off to go, and he went back to sleep. We left not knowing that we would never see him alive again. About 5 hours later, we get a call from the Tomah VA stating that Jason had stopped breathing. They were working on him, trying to resuscitate him, but it was too late. He never got to drive his truck or come home for his daughter's birthday. I then find out he was still on all the medications when the doctor told us she was going to take him off most of them. I think that was insane. Later I find out they also had Jason on pain meds, tramadol, and sent him a bottle of 56 to his house. Why do you put someone with an addiction to pain meds on pain meds? I can't begin to tell you how angry that makes me. I would like one of these doctors to tell me how mixing all of these drugs they had Jason on was going to do him any good. Why doesn't the director of the VA facility take blame for all of this? Isn't he in charge? I'm an independent contractor in the Stevensburg area, and when anybody that works under me on a job site does something wrong, I am responsible because I am in charge. If this facility will not take responsibility for its wrongdoing, then I think this system is totally screwed up. I think all who had part in my son's death should be held accountable. If they aren't, then what kind of message are we sending? Is it not okay to have a patient die in a mental health ward because of being over-medicated by the doctors and no one is at fault? If after today's hearing nothing major gets changed, then I think people will lose faith in our government. Let's make some historic changes that we can all be proud to be part of. Give these veteran men and women a fighting chance for a bright future instead of a cloudy one from being over-medicated so they know what it feels like to be normal. I think this is going to be a great chance to have all government parties work together to show veterans you really do care. After all, these people should be the most important priority to all of us because they are our real-life heroes of this country. I am proud my son was a veteran, and he will always be my hero.
Thank you, Marv, for that powerful testimony. Our next witness is Heather Simkuski, the widow of Jason. Heather?
Thanks for having
Heather, could you put the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth? Thank you.
Jason and I met 13 years ago while both serving in the Marine Corps together in Hawaii. After the Marine Corps, I moved from my hometown in Ohio to Wisconsin. Stevens Point is Jason's hometown, and where he had many dreams of taking over his family business, along with so many other dreams for our future. Even when life seemed impossible and we questioned ourselves, we always found the strength and love to work through it. Neither of us could ever give up on each other or our marriage. Our daughter, Anaya, has been cheated out of every Father's Day, having a father at her soccer games, having her dad to walk her down the aisle one day, and most importantly, she was cheated out of his unconditional love, support, and guidance in life. Jason was not only my best friend and husband, he was my family. When my mother passed away 3 years ago, the same day I was diagnosed with cancer, leaving me with no parents, he was the one that was there for me during the most difficult times of my life. He was my rock. I could always count on his love. He drove 9 hours in the middle of the night to be by my side during emergency surgery. He's the person I called when I had something to talk about, whether it was good or bad. He was always the person I talked to. He has been taken from me. During treatment, I never had to question if Jason would leave. He loved Anaya and me unconditionally. He was a good person with such a good heart and was taken far too early from us. This is not how he deserved to lose his life. Because of the treatment Jason received at the VA, the only family I had here aside from my daughter was him. I still do not know how we ever find peace, because in my heart I know he should still be here with us today. Anaya and I lost more than a husband and a father. We lost part of ourselves, a part that I don't know you ever get back. With this, it is so heartbreaking to know that someone with such love and passion for helping others has been taken from Anaya and I truly believe in my heart that he would be here today with the proper treatment. I have so many questions which I hope to find answers for. I would like to understand how and why Jason's police reports disappeared. There are reports that he made to Dr. Houlihan, the Tomah VA, the Tomah Police Department, as well as the FBI regarding patients selling their prescriptions. These reports were made back in 2013. Some of the patients were making so much money that they had saved enough money from selling their prescriptions to put a down payment on a house. Thankfully, I have the voicemails and text messages between Jason and the officers. Otherwise, I'm not convinced anyone would be listening to this point today. I would like to understand who was responsible for these reports, where they are, and why no one did anything with the reports. Additionally, when you are managing someone with addiction to prescriptions, or anyone for that matter, once they are admitted into inpatient care, why do they still continue to receive the same medications by mail at their house, the same ones that they are receiving while at the inpatient facility? I also have concerns about the way Jason was treated by the doctors as a patient. When he complained that his medication was making him uncomfortable one evening, he knocked on his physician's door. She opened it and slammed it shut in his face. He was not a prisoner, nor was he in boot camp any longer. He was a veteran who was willing to sacrifice his life every single day for each and every single one of us, including those treating him. And to know this is how they treat their patients is devastating and completely unacceptable. Also, living with Jason, I was able to see the long-term impact of all of the medication. I would see him falling asleep while he was eating. He would drive up on the median. He would slur his words when he was speaking. He wouldn't be able to work sometimes for weeks, even months at a time. There were times he would sleep 18 plus hours a day. There were times he wouldn't come out of his room for days and he would sleep all day. Jason did not even realize his behavior was so erratic at times that there were instances where I would video record it and show him later so he would see what I saw. I would like to understand how a doctor can prescribe 14 different medications and know which ones are working and which ones are not. When you have that many medications in your system, your mind is altered. At that point, I question how a patient can even articulate to a doctor what normal feels like anymore, especially after mixing and matching, in my opinion, experimenting with medication on our veterans, my husband. I would also like to understand why alternative treatments were not tried for Jason. After years and years of prescription treatment, he was not rehabilitated. Does the VA only believe in treating addiction by replacing one addictive medication with several others? I personally do not consider this success. They did not just take away a person, they took away a hero, a friend, a husband, a father, a brother, and a son. Everywhere we go and everything we do, there are constant reminders of Jason's life, and it is so unfair to him and every single veteran out there to think that this is the type of treatment that is acceptable. Veterans whom are willing to sacrifice their life for you, every single person in this room and in this country. They deserve so much more than second-class health care. They should be proud to walk into a medical center to receive care. It should be world-class treatment, not a last resort for those with no alternative health care insurance. This should be the last place cuts are ever made. I believe our family and every single veteran deserves answers, and there should be significant strides made to rebuild the trust of all veterans.
that they can trust that they will receive the highest quality of health care from the VA regardless of the cost. I also feel we all deserve to know how to push for change effectively. I say this with no sarcasm intended, but it currently seems that the only way to get anyone to do the right thing is to involve the media. I ask myself today, if it had not been for the reports on this story, if there would ever be any changes made at the Tomah VA. I would like to understand how processes can be put in place to ensure there is accountability without such extreme measures.
Thank you, Heather. And I think I speak for all of us again. Heather and Anaya and Marvin, Linda, we are so sorry for your loss. The next tragic story will be told by Miss Candace Dellis. She's the daughter of Thomas Bayer, a 74-year-old veteran who passed away after waiting for treatment for over 2 hours at the Tomah VA Medical Center. Ms. Dellis.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I realize that my father's death was not related to medications, but I believe it speaks to a broader issue of care at the VA. 50 years is a long time to keep a secret. My father, Thomas Bayer, was drafted and proudly served in the U.S. Army until he was medically discharged with a service-connected mental health issue. Between the time he left the Army in 1965 until his death in January 2015, he was treated off and on and hospitalized at several VA hospitals. One was Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Aurora, Colorado, which is now closed. Another was the St. Cloud, Minnesota VA Hospital. The most recent and the last was the Tomah VA. He was hospitalized and treated twice in the inpatient mental health unit at the Tomah VA, once in 1970, shortly after he met my mother, and again in 1982. He and my mother remained silent about his illness, even keeping it from me until I was in my late teens, in an attempt to protect me from the realities that they both face daily. Until today, aside from me, my mother, and a few close friends, no one other than his doctors knew of his struggle, because there was, and still is, maybe to a lesser degree, a stigma that goes along with mental health issues, a stigma that causes feelings of shame, fear, and hopelessness, a stigma that leads to blame, discrimination, and misrepresentation in the media. That is why I have not spoken about this in detail until now. My father was treated at the Marshfield Clinic Medical Center on Friday, January 9th, 2015, for a bronchial infection. He was prescribed steroids as well as an antibiotic. Over the course of the weekend, his behavior had changed. He was restless, confused, and dizzy, symptoms that were related to his mental health issues and symptoms that could be triggered by steroids. So on January 12th, we tried to make an appointment for him to see his regular provider at the Marshfield Clinic. We were unable to do so because of scheduling. My mother and I discussed it with my father, and he felt as though he needed to be hospitalized, so we called the Tomah VA. We explained the symptoms that we thought were mental health related, as well as the symptoms of the bronchial infection, which included trouble breathing and the fact that he had COPD. We were told that we could bring him down and he would be evaluated. There's an important point that I would like to make. We've been questioned by cowardly, anonymous VA employees in Tomah on news websites and on forums, one of which hid behind the screen name Tomah RN. These employees disingenuously ask, "Why didn't you take him to a local hospital?" Here are our reasons why. First, trust. Second, fear. And third, duty. First, we trusted the VA nurse who told us to bring him after we told her his symptoms. We trusted her medical knowledge and training and believed she would tell us to go elsewhere if it sounded like his symptoms were life-threatening and the VA could not treat him there. We trusted that she was confident that the VA could treat my dad in a compassionate and competent manner after we drove 60 miles to get there. Second, we feared the VA would stick my parents with a medical bill. When the nurse told us to come in, we were required to come in under implicit threat that my parents would bear the burden of enormous medical fees. You see, in the 1990s, my dad had a similar emergency. My parents made the mistake of seeing a community doctor with no prior approval for the emergency with the VA, and my parents were stuck with a bill for thousands of dollars. Third, and most importantly, Veterans Affairs has a duty to competently treat our nation's veterans in exchange for our veterans fulfilling their duty to protect our country. My dad was entitled to competent care, and the VA had a duty to provide that. I would not be here today if the VA had fulfilled its duty to my dad. I have thought long and hard about those anonymous public jabs at our grieving family from Tomah VA employees. Shame on you, whoever you are, because our trust in Veterans Affairs and in you to fulfill your duty is what killed my dad. We arrived at the at the Tomah VA urgent care at approximately 11 a.m. When we checked in, I explained my father's symptoms and the urgency that he needed to be seen. It wasn't until nearly 2 hours later, when he slumped over in the wheelchair he'd been sitting in, that we were seen. He was unresponsive for several minutes. While they were trying to speak to him, I kept telling them I thought he had had a stroke, since his left side was limp and he was leaning in that direction and unable to speak. They told me he was fine because his vitals were normal. I asked them again to please do whatever tests they could do to see if he had suffered a stroke. I was told they were too busy, and since at the time he was able to speak and respond, although barely and not understandably, that they were going to put him in a room until someone was able to evaluate him. They did an EKG. I had to help the technician fix the machine because the paper had jammed and she didn't know how to fix it, and a chest x-ray, but no tests relating to stroke, even though I had asked repeatedly. Approximately 45 minutes had passed, and my father stated he needed to use the restroom. The nurse got him up on the side of the bed. My mom and I went outside for a few minutes to give them privacy, and when we came back in, no more than 5 minutes later, we walked into the urgent care to hear the nurse screaming for someone to help her. We could hear her at the end of the hall, just past the nurse's station, where there were other staff, but no one moved to help. As my mother and I ran down the hall, we came into the room to see my father, half in the chair, half on the floor, completely unresponsive, his left side hanging limp, but worse than the first time. The nurse was trying to get under him to get him back into the chair. My mother was screaming, and I went to get someone to help. Finally, 2 other nurses came in and got him back into the bed. According to their website, out of the 94 doctors and nurses, the Tomah VA has 1 doctor that is board certified in emergency medicine. This doctor is Dr. James Patterson, the doctor who was working in the urgent care that day and the doctor who treated my father. Dr. Patterson said my dad had suffered a massive stroke and told the nurse that a CT was needed. The nurse replied with, "We can't, the CT is down." Dr. Patterson said he would need to be transferred to another hospital because they were not able to properly treat him there. I asked about the clot-busting drug for strokes, but he told me they could not administer the drug without first doing a CT scan. They told us they were going to fly him to Gunderson Lutheran in La Crosse. A few minutes later, they came back saying there were no helicopters flying that day, but they would not tell us why. It seemed completely strange since it was a clear day with no wind. When we were then told he would be taken to La Crosse via ambulance, an ambulance that they were intercepting that was originally on its way for another patient who was having a possible heart attack. When we arrived at the emergency room in La Crosse, the doctors indicated that he should have been given the clot-busting drug at Tomah and that they could not understand why he was not, nor why he was not flown to the hospital. A CT scan was done immediately and surgery performed to remove the clot from his artery, but my father never regained consciousness. Tuesday morning, January 13th, my mother was told by a social worker at the hospital that the VA would be paying for all of my father's medical care at Gunderson Lutheran, as well as any rehab that would be needed, but my father never left the hospital alive. They did another CT scan on Tuesday evening. They indicated he had likely suffered another stroke and had a brain bleed, and that his brain was swelling. After long discussions with the doctors at Gunderson Lutheran about his prognosis, my mother and I decided to remove any life-sustaining equipment, and at 4:20 p.m. on Wednesday, January 14th, my father died at the age of 74. In 1982, when I was 7, I traveled to the Tomah VA hospital with my mom to visit my dad at the inpatient mental health unit. We did this on several occasions, I am told, but I only have one memory. I remember being on an elevator inside the hospital with my mom and the doors opening between floors to a brick wall. Who knew that 32 years later I would be facing another brick wall of sorts, again at the Tomah VA. We are left with so many unanswered questions, and the VA has been anything but transparent. The fact that my father, a man who proudly served his country, sat for almost 3 hours in the waiting room of Tomah VA's urgent care department is completely unacceptable. Had they done something as simple as a CT scan at Tomah, the outcome may have been different. My mother lost her husband of 43 years, her partner, and her best friend. My 10-year-old stepson lost his grandfather, and I've lost my father. The man who taught me love, compassion, and honesty. The man who, no matter what, always had time for me. And the man whose words made me feel as though I could accomplish anything. I am ashamed to live in a country where men and women are sent to fight wars where they suffer horrible injuries and mental trauma, and when they return, instead of being rewarded for their service and treated with respect, they are ignored, neglected, and left to die. Like the other families here today, I am tired and I am grieving, but I will continue to fight for justice for my father and for other veterans. I want to do whatever I can to ensure that no other family has to go through what we have gone through. I want to be proud to be an American again, but without drastic and immediate change at the Tomah VA, I don't know if that's possible. My family and friends have asked what we will do now. We will fight back, both in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion. This morning, we filed an SF-95 claim with the VA and intend to sue while getting the word out across the nation. We are represented by a leading independent journalist and attorney fighting for veterans across the country. His name is Benjamin Krause. My dad's death will not go unnoticed, and the VA's treatment of him will not be forgotten.
Thank you, Candace. Candace and Zed, again, we are so sorry for your loss. These stories are heartbreaking. I think everybody in this room feels that. I just want to thank all the witnesses for your courage, for stepping forward, for coming here and telling your stories in such a public forum. It's not easy. I understand this. It's not easy to tell the story. It's not easy to listen to them. But I hope that America does hear this. I hope Wisconsin hears this. I hope the VA hears them. But again, thank you for sharing all that. We will proceed to round of questioning here. It'll be 5 minutes. I do ask my colleagues to please respect the 5 minutes. I certainly will, so we can keep the hearing moving. Candace, I'd like to start with you. At what point in time did you see a doctor when you first came into the urgent care center? How long did it take before a doctor was even present?
A doctor was present after we had waited nearly 2.5 hours, and then even after Dad had had the first stroke, it was several minutes before a doctor came into the triage room. We were just in there with a nurse. So it was over 2.5 hours.
It's a very small facility, is it not?
Yes.
Did you ever see a doctor treating anybody else? Were there other emergencies going on?
There were people that had come and gone since we had been sitting there waiting.
And who's evaluating your father for stroke symptoms? Was it a nurse?
It was a nurse. It was the same nurse that had taken his vitals an hour earlier and put us back in the waiting room.
When you finally did see Dr. Peterson, did he express any shock that this had been going on for so long? Or
it's Dr. Patterson.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. He had a nonchalance about him. He acted inconvenienced that he was taken away from whatever he had been doing previously.
And then you were told he was going to be helicoptered after this 2.5 hour, maybe 3 hour wait, helicoptered to Gunderson Lutheran, and then that didn't happen.
Correct.
Can you just explain what happened there?
Well, he had asked the nurse to get a CT, and the nurse told him the CT was down. My mom had overheard someone in the hallway. He said, well, what about Tomah Memorial? And a nurse told him, we can't send there. And then they came back in and told us that they were going to med flight him to La Crosse. So we waited longer, and then they came back in and said, we can't fly him. We're getting an ambulance. We're intercepting an ambulance from another patient, and we'll get you there via ambulance.
Do you know why they can't take them at the other Tomah facility?
No. No one will answer our questions.
We'll try and get an answer to that. Marv, again. You said Jason had a 3-month stay. Was that for his drug addiction?
Right. He was in there 3 months. Basically, the doctor was going to try to change up his medications, and she thought it'd be best if he stayed right there while she was changing all the meds, just because of what kind of reactions he'd have, and she wanted to see him, supposedly daily, as he was getting switched from different kinds of medications to others, which we thought were going to be less obviously then, after he died, we had no idea that he was on. I gave him his meds daily, but not when he went back into that 3-month period, and then when he came home for the couple weeks, I didn't even realize that, until after he died, that he was on that high amount of meds.
But again, he was being treated for drug addiction.
Right.
How many times did you talk to different doctors about your son's care?
Well, my son had the first doctor who was there quite a while, and I'd meet with her and with my son, and I mean there was times that my son was set to go home where I'd pick him up, and he was all slurry yet, and I'd say I don't think he's ready to be going back home. I think something's wrong here, and she said, well, he's fine. He's fine to go. And I mean, one time I told her, I said, I see him and I see a lot of these other patients that are walking around like zombies here. Everybody looks half dead. And I said, if he's so fine, why don't you let him drive your car in the parking lot? And she said, well, he's not driving my vehicle. But she said he was able to drive a vehicle. Well, he ended up getting a speeding ticket afterwards, and I think he went in the ditch one time where he fell asleep, and I mean he wasn't in no condition to drive, as Heather stated. So it seemed like the nurses and that seemed like they tried to help, but the doctors wouldn't take advice from the nurses or the counselors. I mean, he'd go into the group meetings and the 28-day program, and he didn't get anything out of it because he was so meted up. He didn't even know what was going on half the time. All he was worried about is getting his medications from the VA.
So you just say the doctors were dismissive. Heather, did you have discussions with doctors? I mean, did you ever get any explanation?
I didn't have discussions with the doctors, but I would ask, Jason all the time why his behavior was so erratic, and we would talk to Marv. We'd include Marv on everything, and Marv would talk to the doctors, but they would never. We never got anywhere. He was safer, in my opinion, at our home than he was in their care, because they consistently did the opposite of what we would and Marv would ask them to do.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chairman Miller.
Dr. Johnson, in your testimony, you mentioned that your refusal to fill several narcotic prescriptions written by Dr. Houlihan were the basis for your firing. Is that correct?
Yes.
In your career as a pharmacist, how many times have you refused to fill a prescription?
Those that were from the Tomah VA, and one other prescription at my current facility. It was for a methadone prescription that was trying to be illegally prescribed for opioid withdrawal, which is illegal if you do not have a special license.
And how many times were you retaliated against for not filling these prescriptions?
Every time at the Tomah VA, and essentially even the time at the current facility I'm at.
You were retaliated at your current facility as
yes.
well?
Mm-hmm.
Your testimony, you mentioned you were only at Tomah for a year, from the
yes.
July 08 to June of 09. Talk about your career before and after.
I came to the Tomah VA facility. I was actually a new pharmacist. I did my residency in Columbus, Ohio at the VA there. I worked under a board-certified pain specialist at that time, and I also worked in some disease state management clinics. And then I came to the Tomah VA as my first job outside of residency. After the Tomah VA, I did a short stint with the retail pharmacy of Walgreens for a few months. And then I sought to get back into the VA system in the Des Moines VA, and I've worked there since 2010, working in their pain management clinic as well as doing PACT med management as far as chronic disease state management.
Mr. Honnell, in your testimony, you stated that the system was slow to respond but quick to silence those who raised concerns. Could you elaborate further for us?
Just from the very moment that I blew the whistle and I came out publicly, I filed one morning, and a few hours later I heard from somebody at the OIG, and they basically put an option before me, put me on the spot and said, you can do this anonymously, and then it'll go directly down to the facility and they'll have to investigate it, but we'll be able to more thoroughly investigate if you give us your name so you can give it to the chain of command. And of course, it's one of those crossing the Rubicon type things. once you make the decision to release your name publicly, then, especially in the VA culture, get ready for a wild ride. I mean, the circus is just beginning. And it happened all the way from within my service line, and it just built from there. I mean, my initial complaints were just fraud and abuse and, trying to get somebody to look at it within my service line. And before I know it, everybody's telling me, don't go to Dr. Houlihan, who is the one I would have to jump over my service line manager to talk to, because he retaliates, nothing gets done, he's been investigated over and over again. And then Mario DeSanctis, well known that he was a rubber stamp, don't go to him because David Houlihan's the one who wears the pants in the facility. So I was left with, okay, go to the OIG, but once I go to the OIG, it goes down to VISN 12 in Chicago, and then comes back down into the facility basically for Dr. Houlihan to investigate himself. And, just imagine where that goes, nowhere. But that's what's been going on for years in the facility. It's not just me. I mean, Noel talked about it, and it's been going on for years and years, where complaints are sent down instead of up to the people who can independently and objectively investigate.
Heather, in your written statement, you questioned why alternative treatments weren't provided to Jason. Did Jason ask for any alternative treatments?
Jason didn't ask for any alternative treatments, but I don't know anyone with an addiction to pain medication that's going to ask for a different treatment. Most of them can't say no. They're going to take whatever they get and numb the pain, whether it's with that same prescription or something different.
Did the doctors ever offer something alternative to prescriptions?
Absolutely not in my knowledge. They've never offered anything except for substitution of medication.
Candace, real quickly, because I only have just a few seconds left, but if your family had not had to worry about being charged for going to a hospital other than Tomah, would you have gone? Do you think you'd have gone to another hospital, or would you have gone to Tomah anyway?
Absolutely. We live in Marshfield, and we have the Marshfield Clinic facility there. And it's one of the better facilities in the state.
Thank you. Yield back.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. Heather, you and I have talked about the tragic loss that both you and your daughter Anaya must deal with because of Jason's death, and you deal with that every day. But his treatment at the VA started to affect your family a long time before Jason's death. And in your testimony, you talk about the long-term impact of all the medications that Jason had prescribed to him. Can you talk to us about how Jason's personality and behavior changed from when you first met him and when he began the treatment at the Tomah VA?
Absolutely. When I first met Jason, his personality was magnetic. I don't know a girl in the world that wouldn't have wanted to date Jason. We went down that road in the beginning, Jason was driven, motivated. When I met Jason, I truly believed our future was going to be limitless. I believed we would have the American dream. Everything would be amazing and wonderful and perfect. And once he started receiving the treatment, the prescription pain medications, it slowly started with missing a day or two of work. Then he became irritable. It became to the point where he wouldn't remember what he was saying, what he was promising. He started missing holiday events, special occasions, because he couldn't get out of bed. He would, to the point where he would lay in bed sometimes for days, weeks at a time. He didn't want to do that, but he couldn't. He couldn't get up, he couldn't do anything. And there were events for our daughter Anaya that he would miss, very special events. There were times he found it hard to get out of bed sometimes to do just very basic tasks for her. He became somebody that, like, I didn't even know. It was like Jason's body and face was there, but his personality changed so much to a point where it created so much difficulty to where I would have to move out at times and move back in once medication would appear to make him normal, and then he would go back to the doctor, they'd change his medication again, he'd come back. It was constantly a roller coaster ride, and he just, we always had hope that he would be the same, but it just never was. He would nod off, fall asleep. He'd fall asleep driving. fall asleep eating. There was times he would get up in the middle of the night, turn on the oven, and if I wouldn't wake up, I'd be afraid he was going to burn the house down. There was all kinds of erratic behavior. I mean, his appearance, everything. You know, the side effects were just jarring, and I can't imagine a doctor sitting across from Jason looking at him when he first came and got treatment on that first day to the end wouldn't see those side effects, because they were clear to everyone around us, not even just me. Friends and people in the community noticed as well.
Marv, you raised Jason from a young boy to a proud Marine. And can you also speak with us about the changes that you saw occurring with Jason after he first began receiving treatment at the Tomah VA?
Well, first of all, he went from about 180 pounds to 250 for the day he died. He lost all his self-esteem. He didn't want to be seen in public anywhere. He didn't want to go in any place to eat. He'd go to a drive-up window because he didn't want to go inside anywhere. He worked with us in the family construction business, and I mean, I'd have to go check on him a lot of days because he wouldn't come to work, and I'd have to get him out of bed and get him going and make sure he took his medication. And when he first got back from the Marine Corps, he was an energetic, motivated person. I mean, he wanted to go far. He wanted to make our business boom bigger. He had a lot of great ideas. He was really smart, and he had a real nice personality. I mean, he could think of anything. I should say, not think of anything. He could actually do anything he wanted. He was real talented, but he lost all that. He lost his drive for anything, and like I said, his weight. I mean, he couldn't bend down good to tie his shoes or anything at the end. I mean, I had a hard time just getting him to function every day, but he was good for a while, and like I said, then all of a sudden with all these different medication changes, he just went downhill real fast.
Heather, I wanted to ask you about the statement you made in your testimony regarding missing police reports. Can you recall any instances where Jason reached out to the Tomah VA Police Department regarding other Tomah VA patients attempting to sell opioid prescription drugs like OxyContin?
Yes, I have text messages on one of Jason's old phones from 2013. He had gotten a different phone later on, but we still had that phone at my house. And when I go through it, there's several, I think there's over 160 text messages between the Tomah VA police chief and Jason, where Jason was willing to, Jason didn't want to be on drugs. He actually said the temptation of the veteran trying to sell him the drugs was enough to make him want to turn that veteran in because he couldn't resist the temptation. So he actually was working with them. He was willing to actually do a controlled buy or wear a wire or anything he could to get this veteran off the streets, per se. And at the end of the day, nothing ever became of it. Jason sent screenshots of the veteran to the Tomah Police Department, Tomah VA Police Department, screenshots of the veteran offering to sell them drugs, and nothing ever became of it.
Page 3 of the...
We can stick to time limits here.
Okay, we'll follow up on the next round.
Okay, thanks. Congressman Waltz, if you'd please also just reintroduce yourself. Yes. I'm going to ask Congressman Abrams to do the same thing.
Absolutely. I'm Tim Walls. I serve on the VA committee for the past 4 Congresses, and I represent Minnesota's 1st Congressional District, which is the southern tier of Minnesota. Once again, thank you all for your testimony. And Mr. Simkuski, if there's no one, it was painful to hear you speak, and I hope it was painful for everybody in this room to hear it, because if that's what it takes to shake us out of this, because I'm going to tell you something here this is all senseless and avoidable, we're hearing this, but I'm going to tell you something that's probably going to really make you angry. What you're telling, other people have been down this road, and folks have tried to implement that, and that's what gets so frustrating. Heather, could I ask, why was Jason being prescribed this? What did they say was wrong with him, and why were they prescribing him these drugs?
His diagnosis was consistently changed. One doctor would say one thing, another doctor would say another. It was consistently changing. One doctor would say he had one mental illness, the next doctor would say he doesn't have that, and they would say he had something different. it was always a changing story.
And before he went in there, and as you noticed this, and I think most of us in this, there's a lot of folks sitting behind you and folks that understand this, that PTSD and other things, as we're starting to get to it, why did he go in the first time? What did he hope to get from, what did he want him to fix, if you will?
His addiction to the pain medication.
All right, and it's the pain medication, and this is what I want to get back to again, and I want to read this for you, Marv. This is going to not make you happy. My colleague and I, Jim Ramstad, introduced and subsequently passed through Congress in 2008 VA Pain Directive 2009-053, calling for implementation of a system-wide tiered pain management model that stepped up before we got to where you got. We went all the way through this, and the Institute of Medicine, which is the gold standard for looking at this is what they said about the VA. They said the VA has done an excellent job in developing this comprehensive blueprint. Did any of you speak to a pain care management person?
Absolutely not.
You know how many people do? 7% from pain management.
I didn't even know there was one.
Yeah, you didn't know there was one. And you know what that person's job was supposed to be? To counsel you as the family, and you with your right to sit there advocating for your son as an advocate, to explain to the entire family and to the patient exactly what these things were. And what the chairman was asking about is, were there other alternatives, like chiropractic care? Because if you can relieve the pain, the issue here is to get rid of the pain. The issue is not. And be very clear, these drugs are powerful and important and helpful tools in the right dosages, in the right situations. But the problem is, it's an easy way to get away from looking at the root cause of the problem, and you were never asked. You were never asked to get there. I'm going to ask you, Ms. Johnson, Dr. Johnson, was that available, the pain care management, was that available at Tomah?
Absolutely not.
So it was never implemented. Because here's what it says.
No.
Unfortunately, the step care model, a critical but unfulfilled component of their national pain strategy. So no one told you about it?
No.
And Mr. Honnold, you're convinced even if it was there that these guys would have gone around it anyway?
That's absolutely correct.
Do you think, though, if it had been there and it had been part of the culture, that everybody who came in, like Jason, and they had to go through this with their family and to get all of this? Because I think each of these people hit on something very important, this sense of trust. We expect them to do the right thing. And don't get me wrong, the vast majority of employees at the VA want to do that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not a pharmacologist, and I don't know pharmacological interactions and everything else. That's somebody else's job. And their job is also, why we put this in, to explain it to the most important person. That's the end user and the veteran. Nothing like that happen? At your new facilities it being done?
At our new facility, we do have a pain management, I guess, actual program, and we do offer alternatives, not just opiates, and we do try to get those patients under the 200 milligram morphine equivalent that they are on. But our interdisciplinary team offers chiropractic care, acupuncture, we have a PT, an OT, psychologist. We have that whole team in place.
Basically what the law asks to do.
Yes.
They have that in Minneapolis, but they have one chiropractor for 10,000 people. And they offer a yoga class at 2 p.m. on Wednesdays. Work that into your schedule.
Yes.
My issue here is can they not... The issue is changing the culture on this. I would ask you, in your professional opinion, before my time runs up, and maybe ask the Simkuskis on this, we can't guarantee that would have prevented this senseless loss. But do you think it might have done something?
I believe that the tragedies that happened to them were absolutely preventable.
I guess it may have helped. It just all depends on what the doctors did after that point. I mean, if they weren't willing to work with the pain management team, then I guess it wouldn't help.
Just as a side note, it expired on October 31st, 2014 in the VA. We have not been able to reauthorize it.
Even if the doctors would not have agreed to work with the pain management team or done that, it is the pharmacist's job and their responsibility. The drug stops there. It comes out of their hands. They are the end gate. They should have stood up and said, no, I would not have processed those medications that were prescribed to Jason. Obviously, I did not prescribe some that I didn't, or dispense some that I did not feel were appropriate. Had somebody said no, even if the doctor decided whatever they want to do, doctors are not God. They have a license. They need to stand up and say no. And everybody at that Tomah VA should be held accountable for that. Not only the people that knew, but every single pharmacist that has dispensed one of those medications. Those medications on the street, every single one came through those hands of those pharmacists. There needs to be accountability.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Congressman Congressman Abraham, if you could introduce yourself real quick before you start your questions.
I'm Ralph Abraham from Louisiana. You can probably pick it up from the accent. But I am a practicing physician also. So I want to first say thank you for your moral courage. I see many of our veterans out in the audience, and acts of courage that are unbounded I know you have performed. But moral courage, you have time to think about what could happen when you testify like this. So thank you so much for showing up and speaking up and being here. And, you know, as a physician, you're right, doctor, there still exists sometimes a God complex that we tend to endow, and shame on us for doing that, and kudos to you for saying no when you should have. If more of that would go on, then we would be more held accountable. It's like Senator Baldwin said, there is a sacred trust, and what more sacred trust between a doctor and a patient? To me, it's even more sacred than a marriage, because a patient will tell me things that they will not even tell their spouse. So we are entrusted with so much of that, and when we breach that, then again, what a tragedy for you guys, because y'all have lived it, and there are no words to describe that. My question to you, Dr. Johnson, I think you've answered in your opening statement. There were no routine UDSs, urine drug screens, used to monitor drug use or abuse. Is that a correct statement?
Correct, and we were actually advised against urine drug screen testing because in the face of a negative urine drug screen, doctors were being coerced or forced into still prescribing the medication, and then we were told we would be held liable for those medications that we were being dispensed when something unfortunate happened, which is the case.
Yeah, how crazy is that? I mean, we know if it's not in the urine, it's not being used, and it's being diverted somewhere. On the opioid safety initiative, were any of the national opioid safety initiatives that I'm familiar with, were they implemented at the Tomah facility?
When I was there, no. A lot of those opioid safety initiatives didn't come out until 2013. But even just one of the initiatives right now is to keep it under 200 milligram morphine equivalents per patient, which is still actually a fair amount of opioids.
It's a lot.
The unfortunate part with Dr. Houlihan, that I believe in even some of the other providers, was that they were unwilling to implement the standard of care or try to bring those patients down. He absolutely refused to change some of those prescriptions, which does not make sense to me, as if you're going to give immediate release acting medication, why would you do that? Why would you not change him to something that could have been long acting, that would have given better pain control, or just tried something different that would have given overall a better outcome for the patient? And that's why I think the motives of him need to be questioned, because it doesn't make any sense as a clinician why he prescribed the way he prescribed.
And I think, Heather, it was you that said we cannot measure, once we put more than one drug in a person's system, much less 14 or 15. No, we don't really know the interactions. Everybody metabolizes drugs differently. Everybody handles drugs differently. And there is no way to know that. One thing the VA as a system, Mr. Arnold, wants is continuity of care. That's what they tout as wanting that veteran to come back over and over. But in Jason's case especially, and a little bit in your case too, Ms. Dallas, that when they saw the physical changes in Jason, the weight gain, the inability to perform work, the purpose of continuity of care is to somebody say, hey, what's different here? And unfortunately and tragically, it did not work in this case, but that is the purpose. So again, like you say, Mr. Arnold, it goes back to the culture of the system. And the panels, everybody up here, we've talked and we understand that it's got to be changed, and it's got to be changed quickly. We are behind the curve by light years, and we need to catch up. So again, thanks for your testimony. I'm most honored to be here. I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congressman. Congressman Kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Congressman Ron Kind. I have the responsibility, the honor really, of representing this district as well as the Tomah VA Medical Center. And Chairman Miller, Chairman Johnson, thank you for agreeing to hold this field hearing. This is not easy. These stories are not easy to be told or to be heard. And hopefully by having it here in the Tomah community, it made it a little bit easier for all of you to share that. I want to thank Senator Baldwin, my colleagues, for joining us at this field hearing. And I was born and raised under the belief that we owe our veterans a debt of gratitude, as well as the benefits that have been promised to them that can never fully be repaid. But we have to try. We have to try. And we can study all the reports and look at all the data and all the trend lines and get all the statistics that we want, but there's nothing more powerful to us policymakers than these personal stories and how difficult it is for you to share them with us. And we share in your grief, and we offer our condolences. But as I've had a chance to speak to all of you about what you've just gone through, I think there's an agreement at this witness table, and you've all done a great job testifying, that you want to do your best to help us ensure that no other veteran and no other family has to go through the type of pain and live through the type of tragedy that you just shared with us today. And that's the higher calling, I think, that we have here as members of Congress, responsible to ensure that our veterans are getting the care and the treatment that they earn and that they deserve. And I think that's our promise to you, that we're going to not rest until we can achieve that goal. So thank you for testifying and for being here today. Dr. Johnson, let me ask you, because I've got limited time, I do have a few questions for you. Are we getting better? Is the VA system getting better at recognizing protocols of care or best practices or best evidence medicine when it comes to the proper pain treatment that our veterans need right now?
Overall, I'd like to say yes. After the 2013 VHA directive came into play and limiting those morphine equivalents, that has become a big thing. The pendulum in pain management is swinging from constant opioid medications to finding alternatives for patients. We're trying to implement those cognitive behavioral therapy programs for several of those veterans. It is a slow change, and we have built a culture so far that we have been giving these patients this medication for so long. It's hard to bring those patients off of that medication. So it's going to take time for the whole entire culture and the facility VA-wide to change. But I do believe for the most part, and most of those VAs, this is occurring.
Yeah, but you feel more confident that there are complementary forms of treatment, alternative forms of treatment that can supplant the cocktail type of default button that seems to be pushed all too often with our veterans?
Yes, I'd actually like to note that the American College of, or Academy of Neurology actually just posted that article recently, said that there is no long-term evidence to support chronic opioids in back pain, fibromyalgia, or headache pain. That is probably 3/4 of the patient population that I see. I'm not doubting the patient's pain. What I'm trying to say is that as the brain chemistry changes because of the drugs we are giving, we need to find ways to find other medications or other non-pharmacological ways to deal with that, because the brain can do that.
Here's what I've been having problems as a novice. I don't have a medical degree. I didn't go to med school or anything, but my suspicion is every individual's pain threshold is going to be different, and therefore it's going to require a more individualistic type of treatment regimen for that veteran. How good are we getting at being able to provide that individual recognition to the veterans?
I do think we're starting to get a little bit better. There are some sites that would potentially even offer some genetic testing or those things to try to make sure that they're those who would absorb or break down the medication differently. Each patient's pain is definitely different. It's my job as the pharmacist on the team to make sure that we are prescribing the medications that are directly related or the best to treat their pain. More often than not, it's not an opiate, unfortunately, for chronic pain patients. I mean, acute pain is a different situation, but I do believe that we're trying to individualize. I will be honest, what I see a lot in my pain management team right now, unfortunately, is trying to deal with the mess that we've made, in that we're dealing with a lot of addiction. We are not necessarily dealing with pain management.
Right, let me switch to you, and thank you for your courageous effort in all this, with the pushback that you've encountered now, even threatening letters for defamation and what that you've had to endure. But you talk about the problem of not having the entities investigate themselves, but clearly we can't send every complaint at a VA medical center outside for an independent investigation. Are there lines that we can draw here that could help us where that's needed in certain circumstances and what needs to be dealt with internally?
Yeah, I would just say, out of my experience, better staff work. I mean, if you're going to have a veteran staffer, they should probably be a veteran. They should probably be somebody who, when they look at a report, that they can identify that quickly. And, in this case, really the bigger problem is with the OIG, because that's their job, right? I mean, they're the ones who field complaints along with you guys, and in a perfect world, it would be the OIG that would be trusted, so they wouldn't have to go to you all. And so the problem is things just kind of snowball. You guys get hammered with more complaints because nobody trusts the OIG, so you're overworked, and you get these reports coming back and forth. I mean, balls are going to be dropped, right? It's just human nature. So I bring it back to two things. Number one, the big thing is accountability. Whether it's the OIG or VA leadership, the VA is a big bureaucratic organization, and you've got a lot of sacred cows, and you've got a lot of moving parts there. And when you have that type of a system, you have to have a system of accountability that's tightly controlled. When I was out of my experience, when I was in the Army and I had to rate NCOs, there was the best NCO, there was the worst one, and that's how you rated them. There's a bottom one, there's a top one. When I was a sales manager in the corporate world, there was the best sales representative, the worst sales representative. You know what it is in the VA? It hasn't got much press. 470 senior executives in the VA. Nobody below the line. Nobody. I mean, it's just, that's something to me it just defies logic. And on top of that, they all get paid bonuses. So until there's accountability, until there's a ranking structure where you can go, here's the people that are below the line, here are the people that need work or they need to go somewhere else. The VA is hijacking itself, and I don't think the proper response from the VA is to say, well, it's federal workers, it's harder to get rid of somebody, blah, blah, blah. They're hijacking themselves. They can't even rate who a poor performer is. So of course they're going to have a hard time getting rid of the poor performers because they're all great.
Well, again, I thank all of you for your testimony today. We appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman Duffy.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Chairman Miller and Chairman Johnson for holding this hearing in Tomah. So often, these hearings take place in Washington, D.C., but the impact that the Tomah VA has had on this community, on our community, I think it's important that this hearing be held here in Tomah, and I'm grateful for both of you for agreeing to have it here where so many people can attend and be part of the process. I do see a lot of veterans here as well. I want to thank you all for your service, and I know you're coming out not just to make sure we're holding the Tomah VA accountable, but you're here supporting your fellow families who are very courageously telling their stories to this committee and sometimes to the public for the first time. So thank you all for coming and participating. I do want to make one note. We're hearing some of the horrific stories of some of the bad actors in the Tomah VA. I know a lot of veterans who do get good care here in Tomah, and we have a lot of people who care for our veterans here in Tomah, and they work their heart out every day to make sure they offer good care. And we can't forget about that either. But the stories that we've heard today are absolutely unacceptable. We shouldn't have any of the stories of spouses, of daughters, of fathers, of people who passed away because of inadequate care. But I do want to make that one note that it's not all bad, and I think it's important to note that. This is, I would say, not the last step. This has to be our first step. I think our community, our delegation, the Veterans Affairs Committee can't let up. We can't go home after today and say this is the end. This is the first step in a long process to make sure we reform the VA so it works for our veterans, the men and women who have raised their hand to serve their country and are lucky enough to come home. To think that their lives would be risked in the healthcare system that was set up to benefit them, is absolutely unacceptable and untenable. And I think it's all of our jobs to make sure that this is the beginning of the end of poor care in the VA system. Candace, I want to be clear. When your dad was showing the first signs of a stroke, from the first signs, because I know there was, you could argue, well, he had some other issues medically that could have been misdiagnosed on the phone, but when you made it here to Tomah and he became limp on the one side, how long was it from that point until you actually left to go to La Crosse?
It was, there was about an hour in between the first stroke and the second stroke, and then there was about 30 to 40 minutes after the second stroke that we actually left to go to La Crosse, and then it was another over an hour to get to La Crosse.
So it's fair to say there was an hour and a half where he was showing the signs of having a stroke, and care wasn't provided to him.
That's
He
correct.
sat in the waiting room and then back in the emergency room.
I'd like to add that in the waiting room, when he had the first stroke and he was slumped over, visibly slumped over in the wheelchair, my mom was screaming. The woman at the desk sat there and did nothing.
And did nothing.
I got up, I ran to the desk, I said, "You need to get a doctor." And then she finally got up, took her time, went down
Slowly
the hall,
walked.
got someone. All the while, we're trying to talk to my dad and get him to respond.
An hour and a half and then another hour to La Crosse. Ms. Johnson, you had indicated we haven't talked about this a lot, and if you could try to answer this somewhat quickly, I have limited time. You said there were 3 people who really haven't been talked about who died in the parking lot here in the Tomah VA that are not part of the official reports. Is that correct?
Yes, there were 3 unexpected or unexplained deaths in the parking lot that spanned 4-month time frame. I believe it spanned over the 2008-2009 period, so it would have been the winter months. Those are actually documented, and you can see in the president of the AFGE's concerns that she had submitted to the IG and Capitol Hill, I believe, in 2009.
Do you know what those deaths were attributed to?
No, at the time, I said this to the VA Accountability Review Committee that I was not there. I never saw the person in the parking lot. I'm just saying that the Tomah VA is a small facility. I was told that they were Dr. Houlihan's patients. I don't know whatever happened to those patients. I don't know whether they were ever accounted for or whether there was an autopsy.
And did you tell the IG about these deaths?
Yes.
And just quickly, did you see the cocktail of drugs that Jason took before he passed away?
On the MSNBC list, yes, I got him from there.
Was that a dangerous cocktail in your opinion?
Absolutely. I would have never ever dispensed them. The diazepam alone was 60 milligrams. The maximum is 40, plus he was on temazepam. That's 2 benzodiazepines, plus Suboxone and Tramadol. You would never do that.
You never do it.
Never.
And my time is about to end, but I have 5 daughters myself, and I can't imagine your daughter at 12 years old who doesn't have a father to walk her down the aisle. I think that was the most touching point. Little girls should have their dad, and little girls should have their dad walk their daughters down the aisle when they get married, and I'm sorry for your loss. And I promise this panel will do everything we can to make sure that we remedy what's taking place here. Thank you for your testimony.
Congressman Pocan.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my name is Mark Pocan. I represent South Central Wisconsin, parts of 6 counties in the lower part of the state. First of all, to the family members, I don't know if I have the words adequately enough to express the condolences. I just want you to know that what you're doing today and what you're continuing to talk out will definitely leave a legacy for your family members, because it's so powerful. We will get something done, and it's because of your courage and your speaking out that's going to happen. If I can just ask a quick question of Heather, if it's all right, on your husband, was he receiving the opiates because of a physical injury while he was serving? I'm not sure if I quite understood that.
No, Jason didn't have any kind of chronic pain. So his receiving all of those medications was completely bizarre from day one.
And was it, do you think he was receiving the opiates because of post-traumatic stress?
Yes, and other maybe anxiety, things like that, but I'm not a physician to most everyone's point here.
Sure.
But just applying common sense when you're treating someone with an addict, even if there are other addictive medications that he was prescribed, although they were not his choice painkiller of choice, there's popular street alternatives that were given to him that with anybody with common sense wouldn't give somebody with an addiction problem those medications for treatment.
All right, thank you. And then a couple questions for Dr. Johnson and Mr. Hunnell. So I can't wait for the AIG and the VA. Quite honestly, I have lots and lots of questions for them. And in looking at that report, one of the problems that we've talked about is how do you get rid of the problem performance? If you look at that report that we only got because a member of Congress had to make a formal request that they didn't get otherwise, which I find outrageous, that if it had not been for that formal request, we wouldn't even have this to move forward. But the fact that it's not just the employees that we need to get rid of that may have been around for a little while, but in both of your cases, you were around short enough
that you had no protections. And I believe, if I remember right, Dr. Johnson, you were a couple weeks before your year was up where you might start getting those is when this happened to you. And Mr. Honnold, I think same thing before you left. You had a couple, within a week of you making an accusation, that's when you started getting the formal complaints. Can you both just, one, just say if that is correct, but two, what recommendations do you have for people like yourselves that are watching this and able to blow the whistle, but if you do, you risk your jobs? What could be improved to make sure you're getting the protections?
I've said this over and over. I think ultimately there aren't any real whistleblower protections. Just by definition, when you blow the whistle, you're doing it on wrongdoing. And when there's wrongdoing, there's wrongdoers, and they're not going to like that you blow the whistle. So, real protections, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the probationary period. That's been used here in this case. I was only there for 8 weeks, but, you're faced with what all whistleblowers are faced with. Do you hang in the system until the bitter end, until the OIG gives Dr. Houlihan, the investigation, and all of a sudden you don't have whistleblower protection? And, I was a secretary, so maybe I didn't cross all the T's or dot all the I's and see you later, right? And have a termination on your record. Or, do you do what I did and I resigned? I mean, I just got out of there. And initially I was going to be like any other person that had been run out of there. I just wanted to forget about it. And, since I was public, then I had, I just had everybody out of the woodwork coming to me with stuff as serious as patient deaths. So, yeah, I don't really have an answer for it other than, the system needs to be examined, because one thing that I think there's a misperception in the public about federal employees, and that's that they can't be fired. Let me say definitively that is not true. Okay, the 470 senior executives can't be fired because they're incompetent and don't know how to do proper ratings. But the people on the front lines, like Dr. Johnson, on the front line, they get run out all the time. And a lot of the times it is in that probationary period. So
if we could just give a couple seconds to Dr. Johnson to respond to. Thank you, Mr. Hunt.
Yep, I was just going to say, I was taught right is always right and wrong is never right. So as a whistleblower, I guess no matter what kind of repercussions are going to happen, I was not going to be responsible for more deaths in the parking lot. That being said, I believe that new legislation was trying to be enacted and to protect those whistleblowers, and I believe that her name is Ms. Flance, I think, or something I read in the article, that she said that the current system is fine and it works just fine. It does not work just fine. We are both examples of that, and it only protects the management. So if anything could come of that and that portion of it, I would really like there to be legislation that actually passes and goes through that holds those people accountable. Even at the current facility I'm now, I've experienced it over again, and nothing happens to those people. They're allowed to continue to do that because they're in a position of leadership.
I know I have a lot of questions. I know my colleagues do too, but I want to be very respectful of everybody's time. So we always hold the record open for 15 days. I would ask all the witnesses here to be willing to take questions from members of this panel. It'd be very helpful to us. I certainly want to thank you for your testimony, your thoughtful answers to our questions, your courage to tell these stories. I think I speak for everybody in this panel. We are committed to doing everything we can to make sure these tragedies don't happen to others. And I just ask you to please continue to share your story. It's probably the best possible solution or the step we can take to solve these problems. So again, thank you very much. And with that, I'll call the next panel. Thank you. We've seen another panel. Again, it is the tradition of this committee to swear witnesses in. I guess we have two main witnesses. So everybody who may testify or assist in testimony, please stand and raise your right hand. You swear the testimony you give before this committee to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes. Our first witness is Dr. John Day. He is Assistant Inspector General for the Healthcare Inspections of the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. Dr. Day is assisted by Dr. Alan Mallinger, Senior Physician within the Office of Healthcare Inspections of the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. Dr. Day.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, Chairman Miller, and other members of Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today at Tomah to discuss quality of care issues at the Tomah VA. I'm accompanied today by Dr. Mallinger. Dr. Mallinger has published over 100 articles in peer-reviewed journals, held prestigious positions in psychiatry and pharmacology at several prominent medical schools, and led research programs in psychiatry at the NIH. He has worked in the Office of Healthcare Inspections for the last 4 years. Additionally, he is currently on the Ethics Committee of the American College of Psychiatrists. In 2010, the VA and DoD published the Clinical Practice Guidelines, Management of Opioid Therapy for Chronic Pain. Our national review, VA Patterns of Dispensing Take-Home Opioids and Monitoring Patients on Opioid Therapy, which was requested by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and published in May of 2014, includes the following statement. Opioids are powerful medications that can help manage pain when prescribed for the right condition and when used properly. However, if prescribed inappropriately or used improperly, they can cause serious harm, including overdose and death. This national review, which mirrored the time frame of our work in Tomah, demonstrates that in 2012, VA providers were in general non-compliance with this guideline. Whether it be in the use of urine drug screens and follow-up visits, where we found they had 37% compliance with the guideline, or whether it be in the practice of refilling prescriptions early, 23% of the refills were filled early. The concomitant use of benzodiazepines and narcotic medication, which was used 92% of the time in the chronic opioid population, or ensuring that veterans with substance use disorder and chronic pain receive concurrent treatment for their substance use disorder and random urinary drug screening, with which there was 10% compliance. The data in this report makes clear that VA as a system of care was managing this patient population very poorly. The report states the concurrent use of benzodiazepines and opioids can be dangerous because opioids and benzodiazepines can depress the central nervous system and thereby affect cardiac rhythm, slow respiration, and even lead to death. The report also highlights the risk of liver toxicity, as several combination medications include a narcotic and acetaminophen, and at a dose among the chronic opioid user population, 45% of the veterans were prescribed at least one daily dose of 4 grams or more of acetaminophen, placing them at significant risk of liver failure. Who are these patients? 1 in 16 served in Operation Enduring Freedom or Operation Iraqi Freedom. 1 in 3 was diagnosed with a mood disorder. 1 in 5 with PTSD. 1 in 7 with substance use disorder. My written statement reviews the timeline of events related to the Tomah administrative closure. In summary, it was alleged that narcotic medication was being used as the primary treatment for PTSD. That specific patients were receiving poor quality of medical care, and that numerous patients were dying of narcotic overdose. That Tomah providers were contemplating the amputation of a veteran's leg as treatment for his pain syndrome, and that there was inappropriate interference with the administration of the pharmacy service by Tomah management. The administrative closure's first 4 pages deal with the steps OIG staff took to determine if these allegations had factual support. We reviewed numerous medical charts and peer reviews. We interviewed many current and former employees. We contacted the local Tomah police, the Milwaukee police, the DEA. We pulled the email of 17 employees. The OIG Office of Investigations examined aspects of these allegations. We found that the allegations that led us to Tomah could not be substantiated. We did find examples of the failure to comply with DoD-VA chronic pain guidelines, consistent with the national data discussed today. Given that the data we collected did not support the allegations that led us to Tomah, and knowing that our national report would highlight the many deficiencies in VA providers' compliance with these guidelines, I chose to administratively close this report. To ensure that the deficiencies we identified were corrected by DHA, Office of Healthcare Inspection staff met with the director of Tomah, met with the VISN director, and I was in frequent contact during this period of time with managers at VACO, at central office, discussing the issues related to Tomah. Both of the gentlemen, the director and the facility and VISN director, were familiar with both the individuals and the issues that we brought forward to them at Tomah. These leaders discussed the changes that have been instituted and future planned actions to address the deficiencies we identified. The Office of Healthcare Inspections reviews aspects of hospital performance on a 3-year cycle and reports the results of each review in a combined assessment review report. A review of medical center compliance with current VA stroke guidance is part of our current ongoing review. Upon the completion of data collection and analysis, a summary report with recommendations will be presented to the Undersecretary for Health and then published. I will be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Day. Our next witness is Dr. Carolyn Clancy. She's the Interim Undersecretary for Health at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Clancy is assisted by Ms. Renee Oshinsky, the Acting Network Director of Veterans Integrated Service Network 12, and Mr. Mario DeSanctis, the Medical Director, Center Director of Tomah VA Medical Center. Dr. Clancy.
Good afternoon, Chairman Johnson, Chairman Miller, and members of the committees. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this hearing and to discuss the quality of care at the Department of VA Tomah Medical Center. To be efficient, I won't repeat your introductions, Senator Johnson, of my colleagues. I want to begin by expressing my profound sympathy to the families of the veterans we've lost here. The stories you've told today have been noted by others are a profound and invaluable gift to us, and we will use that to improve. And it's an invaluable gift to current and future veterans. So both those who are served by this facility and across our system. And, you know, I have a personal stake in this. My husband's brother, has devoted his career to military service and is now served by VA. And I'm sure that's true for all of us in the room. If it's not us personally, we have family members. So our commitment to you is that we will use this information to improve now and in the future. In addition, I also want to thank the whistleblowers who stepped forward. We had some time to meet earlier today for their courage. It takes at some personal risk. We heard that earlier. They refuse to be silent when they observe problems. Secretary McDonald, Deputy Secretary Gibson, and I have met with whistleblowers and have consistently emphasized that retaliation will not be tolerated. Last, I want to express our appreciation to multiple members of the Wisconsin Congressional Delegation for their input and inquiries. VA is committed to providing timely, high-quality care. We can and have to do better. We have significant challenges to overcome here in Tomah, and we own them. Unfortunately, unsafe practices in pain management and psychiatric care and reports of fear and intimidation have cast a dim light on care provided at this facility. And the bottom line is that there have been a number of failures. Failures to veterans and, frankly, failures to the frontline staff at Tomah who work very hard every day. I want to assure you that as investigations are concluded, we will act quickly, decisively, and productively with veteran outcomes in the forefront of all of our decisions. I also want to assure you that we are not waiting for the completion of all investigations to make required improvements here and across the system right now. We're also supporting research as I speak to evaluate alternatives to opioids in the management of chronic pain. That's non-narcotic medications, acupuncture, biofeedback, other kinds of treatments. And frankly, we're optimistic that this work will also help all Americans suffering with chronic pain. We're working internally to address these issues, and as you know, we're receiving assistance from outside of the Tomah. VA Central Office sent in its clinical team review, and that preliminary findings were released. That initial review identified gaps in care and failures to adhere to recommended practices, and we acted by disseminating a tool system-wide that makes it far easier for clinicians to do well by veterans and to identify veterans who may be seeking narcotics from other facilities within the system. The OIG, the Joint Commission, the Drug Enforcement Agency have reviewed the Tomah facility, and Wisconsin's Department of Safety and Professional Services are also investigating, and we welcome that. We realize that we need to regain trust. It will take transparency as well as candid, honest, clear, consistent communications across the organization. First is the veterans' trust, and the only way to regain that is to put the veterans first in every decision. The individual veterans' outcomes from their perspective is our true north. We also need to regain the public's trust, as well as the trust and confidence of veterans representatives, both in Congress as well as veteran service organizations and other entities. That will take time, and frankly, it will take demonstration of results. Lastly, central to any success is to regain the trust of the Tomah frontline employees and staff, the vast majority of whom are doing their best to serve their veteran patients every day. During my visit to the Tomah facility 2 months ago, I met with many dedicated staff members who are bearing the brunt of these issues. I heard directly from employees here about their concerns and fears, and while investigations continue, it's imperative that we also focus on care provided to veterans that we have the privilege of serving here at Tomah. And you know, those employees have a lot to be proud of. In benchmarking with the private sector, the Tomah facility actually does very well in a number of areas. So in conclusion, you can expect that the Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and I will always put veteran outcomes first, and we will act swiftly, and when we have actionable information, we will act on it promptly. These investigations are an opportunity to get to the bottom of any issues so that moving forward, we can make sure that these preventable deaths are not repeated here or elsewhere. But most importantly, the reason I can be optimistic is that the devotion, resilience, and passion of the frontline staff here at this facility will help us overcome these challenges. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Clancy. Let me start with the last point you made about regaining trust of the employees, and also the point you made that we really need greater transparency and accountability. In terms of retaliation, first of all, how long have you been with the VA?
A year and a half.
Year and a half. What did you do prior to that?
I worked at HHS. I directed a research agency that focused on safety and quality of care.
Okay. I will say in our communication and work with you, I've been very pleased with your cooperation, so I truly appreciate that. In your year and a half in your position, how widespread do you find this type of retaliation that you're witnessing and you're hearing about here in Tomah? Throughout the VA. Is this really a very unusual situation, or do you think that type of retaliatory behavior against other whistleblowers, because it sounds like it might be more widespread?
I don't think that we have celebrated negative feedback, uncomfortable feedback as a gift that it is. It is a gift. If someone tells us very specifically, whether that's an employee, a patient, a family member, you could have done better, or my family member would have done better if you had done this, that's the only way we get better. And I don't think that we have celebrated that enough. Some of our facilities do. Some actually have awards for employees that identify near-miss mistakes and so forth, but we're not good enough about that.
Are you actively working on cases similar to this in terms of the severity of retaliation that's being reported?
Yes, we are.
How many? Dozens? A couple?
I don't know the numbers, more than a couple, for sure. And I'm not sure that we have identified all of the cases that need to be investigated. I'm sure as a result of this, having spoken with Dr. Johnson earlier today, that we will identify more that we didn't know about. So I want to be very cautious in terms of using numbers. I think you know that the Secretary instituted a single new team, the Office of Accountability and Review, specifically focused on investigating retaliation by senior leaders to employees.
I appreciate that. It's very positive development here, and we truly appreciate that. Dr. Day was in charge, I think, of the report that was signed on March 12th, 2014. The final report says, signed by Dr. Day, that I concur with the recommendation for administrative closure of this inspection. Was that closure, administrative closure, was that recommended by somebody? Was it a panel? I mean, how did that exactly work? Or did you decide that on your own?
So my office routinely has a number of hotlines that we review. And if at the end of that hotline review, we determine that the allegations are essentially not substantiated, then we may make the decision not to.
So that's basically a team decision then. So you're concurring with the team of inspectors on doing administrative closure?
Yes.
Okay. So again, you were based on the recommendation of a team within the Inspector General's office.
So the folks that work with me, we sat down and decided that was the right answer.
Yeah, I want to ask, some standard for substantiation of some of these charges. I'm going to read from your report. While we did not substantiate the allegation of abuse of authority, intimidation, retaliation when staff questioned controlled substance prescription practices, okay, so you didn't substantiate that, we did find that these are widely held beliefs and concerns among most pharmacy staff and among some staff. What does it take to substantiate claims of retaliation and intimidation? I mean, what would be the standard for substantiation if that's not it? If everybody in the pharmacy is basically saying there's retaliation and a climate of fear.
So what we were looking for were clear evidence of if somebody threatening a person or somebody saying in an email or somebody making a statement, if you don't do this, then I'll do that. So we were looking at evidence beyond the story, something we could use to support the story.
When you were before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee on Thursday, I asked you, when did you first find out about problems in Tomah? You stated about 2011 with some of those anonymous letters that were brought to the fore. Did you go back in time? I don't know if you hear when I was going through the timeline of when Dr. Houlihan was hired, how we have employees of the facility documented. They were back then in 2009 already referring to him as the Candyman, and this is Candyland, and that they're already concerned about large quantities of painkillers being prescribed. I mean, were you aware of that? Was that part of your inspection?
So so the short answer is no. I didn't look prior to 2011. We got an allegation in 2011 that indicated along the same lines that we eventually turned into an administrative closure. But with that review, I sent it to the business director and said, these are serious allegations, please look at these. We get in the order of 40,000 complaints a year to the IG. My office gets in the order of magnitude 2,400 hotline complaints regarding quality of health care. So we have to have a way to address those complaints. So we have a group of us and we sit down, and 10 years ago we had 3 to 5 complaints a week. Now we get more than 10 a working day. So I have a capacity to produce 50, 60 reports a year. So if we think the complaint is one we can take or should take, we do that. If we think it's serious, we send it to a level of leadership above the level of the complaint and ask them to respond back to us. We then read those complaints, letters back, and if they seem reasonable, then we end up closing that case. Okay. So this is a similar process of trying
by the way, that's a very helpful and interesting metric you just measured there, where you mentioned the number of complaints per day, and the fact that it has risen dramatically. I guess that tells us something that Dr. Clancy's got a real challenge on her hands. Chairman Miller.
Dr. Day, in your written testimony, you state that given the totality of the facts at the time, the administrative closure was appropriate. So, given the totality of the facts that are known today, would you make the same decision?
I think the issue is whether or not my discussions with VA leadership would have resulted in change. And I think looking back, those discussions with leadership at all levels, facility director, vision director, VACO, did not result in change. Change obviously needed to occur. So if I were able to to understand that change wouldn't have occurred, I would have made a different decision. And at that time, I had faith that they would make.
How's the experience changed the way the IG is going to handle similar investigations moving forward?
I think that certainly I've decided, and Mr. Griffin has decided, that we will not administratively close hotline complaints. Further, they will all be published to the web. I think the broader issue of the volume of work is an issue that we need to discuss with the committees in terms of how we communicate the issues that are in front of us, the locations of those issues, so that you understand what we're doing and similarly VA understands what the issues are.
I was troubled by Mr. Hunnell's allegations that an official from the medical center instructed him to not give files to anyone, especially the OIG. Were you aware of an effort by the leadership of Tomah to keep information from your investigators?
No.
So how can you be sure that during your initial investigation, your investigators had access to all of the information that was needed to conduct a thorough investigation?
When complainants are anonymous, we sometimes have a hard time figuring out exactly who the complaint pertains to. So what we often have to do then is take a look at patients, for example, those who are in a group of patients receiving high doses narcotic, or a panel of patients that were under a certain set of circumstances that are described, and we have to go through and check a sample of those patients. So we relied on reading emails that they didn't have the ability to withhold from us. We relied on sampling charts that they didn't have the ability to control. So I think we did everything we could to try to get the right answer and the right data.
Dr. Clancy, we heard about the gentleman who had the stroke, that clot-busting drugs were not administered because they could not get a CT scan. I mean, is that typical protocol that you don't administer that prior to them going through a scan?
Yes, the reason for that is that there's essentially two ways you can have a stroke. One is a clot, in which case a clot buster would be a really good idea. And the other is that you're actually having a hemorrhage, in which case that would be the end. So you actually need to know from a CT scan what's happening. The CT scan was down at Tomah that day for preventive maintenance, and it's my understanding that the patient should have been sent to Tomah Memorial.
And why was the patient not sent to Tomah Memorial?
I don't know, and we need to find that out.
And what are you doing to find that out?
I know that there's an IG investigation ongoing now, and I'm also trying to work across the system to figure out, you know, we have the bottom line is it's hard to get clot-busting treatment in Tomah, Wisconsin, regardless of where you get care. If we had gotten the CT scan, we could have gotten that, but we have the capacity to actually make this available virtually across our system, and that we can make happen.
Is it they can't get the clot-busting treatment at the VA in Tomah, or they can't get it in Tomah?
It's my understanding that there is not a stroke team at the local community hospital. I have not verified that, but that's what I have been told.
What's the normal What's the maximum dosage of opioids for pain that's effective for chronic pain? I had a doctor tell me that there is a level at which more does nothing to help stop the pain.
I'd actually need to consult Dr. Johnson here for a more technically correct answer. I know that right now we are working to keep it below the 200 morphine equivalents per dose per day.
But I understand that is if it's being used for mental health purposes.
No, that is not used to treat mental health disorders. That is used to treat pain.
Okay, well,
and it gets confusing because many of our veterans have both chronic pain for a variety of reasons as well as other mental health disorders.
So
but
Jason,
morphine is not being used to treat mental health problems.
But that's what Jason was being treated for. He had no chronic pain.
Well, what I heard his wife and dad say, and I have not looked at his records, although I know there's been a thorough investigation, was that the diagnosis kept changing. In general, narcotics are not used to treat mental health disorders.
I believe, and I'll go back and check the record, but I believe she said he did not have chronic pain issues. And my question is, I was told that basically anything above 50 milligrams, there is a question as to whether or not it's effective. And my question is, if you're using it for psychotic purposes, for some type of mental health, you're talking about 200 milligrams, so you're giving somebody something that is highly addictive.
Well, I think Dr. Johnson said it well when she said that in some ways we're actually treating the problem that has been created by overuse of these medications. So we've got people whose tolerance levels are very high, and
well,
we need to...
How about we take Dr. Johnson, because she's not on the panel. How about Dr. Clancy?
Sure.
On the record.
Yes.
Talks about it.
I was just being respectful of another discipline, forgive me. So I don't know the specific number at which you can say beyond that it doesn't work. I know that many of our veterans are on doses that are too high. I'm pleased to say they're coming down. They need to come down faster. And very importantly, what I'm almost more worried about is that the fact that they're on narcotics in combination with other medications like Valium, the benzodiazepine group, which can put them at very high risk of adverse effects.
And real quick, we heard today where people have lost sons, they've lost husbands, they've lost fathers. We even heard a lady say she's lost her country. She's ashamed of her country because they let them down. I hope that sinks in at VA.
It certainly sunk in for me, and I will make sure that we honor their experience by committing to do a lot better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That point was well worth a few extra seconds. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to start, I meant to do this at the end of the last panel, but to offer to both committees testimony that was prepared by Lynn Ellingheisen, the president of the American Federation of Government Employees here, and also Jason's mom, Linda Simkowski, prepared written testimony for our committees.
Without objection, so ordered.
So the VA's current investigation into the Tomah VA began this January, and it's looking at a number of issues, prescribing, retaliatory environment, the deaths associated with the facility. A recent media report revealed that employees at the Tomah VA had called local law enforcement more than 2,000 times, seeking help with cases of battery, burglary, an attempted kidnapping, and 24 unexpected deaths. And you heard that in the testimony also in the first panel. Dr. Johnson stated that there were 3 unexplained deaths in the Tomah parking lot, and that all 3 were patients of Dr. Houlihan's. So prior to the current investigation, did the VA ever investigate these allegations, including reports of 24 unexpected deaths and the deaths that Dr. Noel Johnson says took place in the Tomah VA parking lot?
I'm going to ask Ms. Oshinsky if she has more information on that.
I believe there have been a variety of investigations over the years, although Senator Baldwin, I would have to say they were probably case specific. I would also say that I was stunned by the numbers and was not aware that there have been as many as you had mentioned.
Well, I ask that you include all of those in your investigation moving forward. Accountability is an essential piece of the VA's investigation into Tomah. This investigation will rightfully be judged in part by whether those who are found responsible for wrongdoing are held accountable. The veterans who have lost their lives and their families deserve no less. And so far, Dr. Clancy, your review has resulted in some remedial administrative action against responsible VA employees, including Dr. Houlihan. But let me be clear, it is my expectation that these are merely first steps. And so I would ask you to please provide the committees with an update on all administrative actions taken to date. And can we expect additional discipline and when?
I don't want to prejudge the process, so I want to be very careful about what I'm going to say. What I released before was the first phase of a clinical review. The administrative reviews, which is looking specifically at retaliation, is ongoing. There is also a second phase of the clinical review. And I think that there will be additional actions, but that's all I'm going to say about it right in this moment. But I commit to you and other committee members and members here that we will let you know about that promptly when that takes place. We are not intending to make this many months or even many weeks, but we want to make sure that the entire process is fair and rigorous and will withstand appeal.
My office and it sounds like other members of this panel recently learned that Dr. Houlihan was the subject of a wrongful death claim resulting from the tragic death of Craig Farrington, a U.S. Army veteran, back in November of 2007. And most disturbingly, the claim reports that the veteran who is under Dr. Houlihan's care died from drug toxicity. This is the same cause of death of Jason Simkowski. In other words, more than 7 years ago, Dr. Houlihan's treatment, Dr. Houlihan and his inappropriate treatment practices were implicated in the death of a Wisconsin veteran. And last August, Jason passed away from the same cause. How did the VA investigate this death and Dr. Houlihan's treatment at the time or since? And I'm referring to Craig Farrington.
Who was it? At the time, there was a malpractice claim made against VA, and it was initially denied and then appealed, and a settlement was made. When that happens, all practitioners involved in the care of that veteran are reviewed by a centralized Office of Medical and Legal Affairs to determine whether they've met the standard of care. As it happens, about 40% of the time the practitioners are deemed not to have met the standard of care. In this case, Dr. Houlihan and a physician's assistant were both considered to have not met the standard of care. And at that point, the next step is to report the two to the National Practitioners Data Bank. Dr. Houlihan appealed that decision and it was upheld. So he was not reported. So there was an investigation. I know that some of you have actually had the opportunity to review the specific details in camera. That's what I know right now.
Congressman Waltz.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here in your service to our veterans. There's certainly no one questions our commitment to our veterans. And Dr. Day, you and I go back quite a ways too, and you know that my issues with your staffing issue goes back to 2007. The need to have an impartial, fair, and accurate IG is absolutely imperative to the system. So I understand that. And I also understand you have to triage cases, but I am grateful for the change of policy on the administrative closures, just to let us know it's another eye. And again, it's been said by the senator, having the press, they're another eye. They're partners in this, and I know you view it that way. Dr. Clancy, also I thank you for your service, and you've heard me say very often I am the VA's staunchest supporter and harshest critic when they need to be. Just a couple things for me. Do you need us to reauthorize the pain management directive, the one I was speaking of, 2009-053, that expired in October, or can you do that?
You know, we can do that, and we're also working with new directives from the DEA in terms of how often prescriptions, how long they can be written for, and using that to tighten up even further our diversion policies and the ability to take back drugs that people aren't using, because that's an important source for the community. I don't think that we need legislation, but I certainly would welcome your demanding regular reports, because I will be.
Is the step care model, has it been implemented?
It has been implemented, but probably not as consistently as it could have been. I have just mandated last week that across the system we implement a system called academic detailing, which actually works with each frontline clinician and their specific panel of patients to help them customize care and solve problems. As I think you heard from Jason Simkowski's family, a lot of times veterans don't necessarily want to go down this road and may even get angry. So it takes some skill to help them get to a better place. And we have people who are quite skilled at teaching people how to do that. We need to make sure that happens everywhere.
I think that's an important point you bring up, and it's certainly in the private sector also. There are about 25% of Americans going through this, and the opioid safety initiative is being implemented. And this is very controversial, paying contracts, and I think members up here will tell you this. We receive a large number of calls to our Office of Veterans who were pulled away from these, and either for pain management or for the pain of addiction withdrawal that comes afterwards is equally dangerous. And so to get this right, this is a national dialogue and things that have to be put into place. The question I would ask is, how are you handling the folks who are initiating this? And I ask you this because many of my veterans, because your pilot program's in Minneapolis on the OSI, and I'm getting those calls from veterans. How are you handling the soft landing for these folks that are coming down from the addictions?
Well, first of all, we actually actively discourage. It is inappropriate for people to simply say to a veteran, "You're done." If they have been taking these medications for a while, that would be instant withdrawal for some. The one thing that we are checking on and using our new tool as a way to do this is to make sure that people aren't making the reports look better by actually forcing new patients to make that very hard landing. But it is a tough journey. Now, on the other side of it, there are people who couldn't be more appreciative that they don't need these drugs anymore and so forth. And I think that we need to give a louder voice to them. But I try to watch both sides of that.
You know, I look forward to this. I think you bring up a good point. It's the outcomes that we care about. And I'm very interested in working with you on maybe some reportings that come out of this. Because from us to micromanage, and I think you saw what happened is that we got together, we passed a pretty good bill working with folks. But if it doesn't have the outcome, if I have a father here, it didn't work. And so I got to figure out how it works. I'm also going to say, in preparation for this hearing, I went to like the wholesalers, McKesson and some of those, and worked through them on how this whole thing works in the private sector, how the wholesalers get into the pharmacies, how they retail it out, and the state prescription drug monitoring system. If I get a prescription written here and I get it filled, what happens when I drive back to Mankato? Can I fill it again, or will that red hot when I try and do it?
We are working with the state prescription drug monitoring programs in 20 of the 49 states that have them. And we will be getting to the 49. We had an internal issue about differences of opinion about whether we met this, whether we could share the information in a way that didn't violate our security policies. We're working through that right now.
Good. That's the one I wanted to work with you on. I think this just makes good sense. It's the right way to do it. It's an extra check, and it makes sure that these families said that we're not filling multiple prescriptions, they end up on the street. And Dr. Clancy, you and I have always had a very candid and good working relationship. This is just for me a suggestion on this, and I'm thinking of this as a father. Review Jason's file. Just let his dad know you looked at it. I think, I don't speak for him, but I would want to know as a father. I yield back.
Thank you.
Congressman Abraham.
I went to the Tomah facility this morning and did a tour, and you're right, Dr. Clancy, everybody, or most everybody that I came in contact with was motivated, generally seemed to care, but we certainly have a problem embedded within not only Tomah but the VA system. And my question to you, in the VA system in toto, is there a protocol or a requirement for urine drug testing, prescription monitoring stream, having the patient come back every month to receive a narcotics prescription? Is there anything like that out there?
There is a guideline that we jointly developed with the department.
But it's not required. Well, I'm saying, as
I'm
a
just
doc,
struggling with
I know
the
that as a physician, if I know that my prescriptions, the number of narcotic prescriptions that I'm writing are being monitored, if I know that I'm required to get a UDS on that patient, if I know that that patient is supposed to see me every 30 days in order to get 60 or 90 Norcos, then I need to check those boxes. And that's my question. In the VA system, is there a required protocol in place for those physicians?
We have a required protocol in place. We also recognize that an unexpected result on a urine drug screening can mean a couple of things. It could mean our worst fear that they're not taking the medications and selling them on the street. It could mean that they're only taking them intermittently. So the first step is to actually have a conversation with that veteran and then up the frequency of those drugs.
And you and I can get into the weeds as to what one UDS over another one means, but overall, I think it's a good monitoring system.
Yes.
For narcotic abuse or use or diversion. So I guess the answer is right now there's not a required protocol out there. Is that a fair statement?
There is a clearly specified protocol. I think it's fair to say it's been encouraged. It is now being mandated.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ball, you, on your report, you gave some objective data. 37% of the physicians did not adhere to the guidelines. 23% got early refills. If objective data is not being used in your determination that some of these claims are unsubstantiated, what did you use to have a conclusion on your report? I mean, I'm looking at objective data here that's pretty damaging.
That's correct. But what I'm saying is that the providers at Tomah were no better than the general population in terms of following the guidelines. They didn't follow the guidelines. And that was the point we made to the director and the business director in our report. The specific allegations that led us to Tomah, we could not support. And I realize there may appear to be a distinction or a contradiction there, but we were forced to write allegations fairly narrowly so that we can actually try to understand what's going on. And so we did not find, for example, that they were trying to cut off the gentleman's leg because he had pain syndrome. We did not, and when you get to some of these allegations that are made, for example, the allegation that a certain provider threatened that there'd be retaliation if the drug sale was not stopped or there was not some action taken to break up the drug sale. When we actually get right down and we push it and we push it and we find someone who previously would say that they supported that allegation, we find that they melt away and they wouldn't provide that allegation. So I pushed very hard to get facts to support the allegations that I listed in my oral statement. And I just couldn't get what I needed.
Dr. Mellinger, you and Dr. Johnson are the experts certainly in this field, in this room. Do you, having written many articles, studied this, I'm sure, most of your life, do you have a recommended protocol for opioid or benzodiazepine use for chronic pain?
Well, again, I'm a psychiatrist, and I wouldn't portray myself as an expert on the use of opioids or pain management, but as a physician, I certainly have some training along those lines. Psychiatrists who are treating pain in their patients along with psychiatric disorders have a pretty difficult job. And the truth is that every patient is a little bit different. And it becomes very difficult to write sort of universal guidelines. I think a question was asked before, is there a maximum effective dose for opioids? The truth is that as people use opioids over a period of time, I'm sure you are aware of this, they develop a pattern of tolerance and the drugs become less effective. And in order to get the drug to work, physicians find themselves increasing the dose. And that may work for a while. It may also lead to what we call hyperesthesia, where they can actually make the pain worse or produce other kinds of pain. So it really it needs to be worked out on the level of the individual patient. You know, pain can be an exacerbating factor for psychiatric illness. So someone who has bipolar disorder, for example, if you introduce enough pain into the equation, it may trigger mood episodes. It's very hard to come up with a universal recommendation, is what I'm saying, I guess.
Thank you.
Congressman Kind.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for your testimony here today. Dr. Day, you were the lead person on the OIG 2-year investigation of the Tomah VA Medical Center, is that right?
That's correct.
That was 2012, 2013, roughly?
That's correct.
That led to a report that was concluded and closed out in March of 2014, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit for the record a copy of that report if it hasn't been already, unanimous consent. After you had concluded and closed out that report, did you send a team to Tomah VA to brief them on your findings as well as recommendations to be implemented?
We met on the telephone with the facility director and went over the report and recommendations.
Are you reasonably confident that they had moved forward on implementing the recommendations that were contained in your report?
Yes, by what they told us and what sounded reasonable. We heard the same thing from we met at a separate occasion in Washington when the schedules worked to meet with the VISN director. And that gentleman told us similar things about what they'd done to make changes at Tomah.
Director DeSantis, you were the acting director of Tomah VA at the time, is that right?
Yes, it was.
And based on a previous meeting that I had with you and your management team, you assured me that you took the recommendations in this report and started implementing them immediately during the summer of 2014, is that right?
Yes, in fact, we had already worked on corrective action plans and instituting the recommendations even before we got the report. We actually got the report at the end of June 2014.
Is there any of the recommendations that you disagreed with that you decided not to move forward on?
No, it's just that it made it very difficult for me, though, as a director, because there was nothing in the report that indicated that there were any patients at risk based on what was going on, or whether or not the standard of care had been met.
Well, when I showed up in your office too in the summer of 2014, this was shortly after the Phoenix story broke on that, and I came and was asking for information just to assure ourselves that Wisconsin wasn't in the same type of situation, but also asking of any potential problems. And at the time, you didn't talk about this report to me at all. You didn't reveal that it had been done, that you'd been briefed, you were going forward with implementations. But you also indicated that you were instructed not to. Is that right?
Yes, I was instructed by the lead investigator that was in contact with me to not distribute copies of this internal document to others.
Did they give you a reason or explanation why?
No, they did not.
Now, Dr. Day, you can't imagine how frustrating this would be from our perspective. I mean, in part, your 2-year investigation was precipitated based on an anonymous letter that my office received. And when I read through the allegations, I felt they were serious enough, to Mr. Honnold's point, and not just report it to the Tomah management team so that they investigate themselves, but it went directly to the OIG, which led to the 2-year. You guys did it. You did it. You concluded the report. You closed it out. You didn't publish it. I'm glad to hear today that you've taken action now to publish on your website all future reports of this nature. But does that also include notification of the appropriate congressional offices too when you finish reports?
Yes, yes, sir, it does. So if we are aware, and we try to keep accurate track of when you, for example, would send us a letter, we would call that a congressional filing, and we traditionally come back and go to the member of Congress, whether it's an admin closure or not, and report the result of the report. So that's our past practice, and that will be our future practice.
Because we've got a communication problem that needs to be worked out. It's a serious run, whether you're going to be facing more panels like this in the future with unpleasant questions. Now, to move on to a different topic, OIG also finished a report dated May 14, 2014 on healthcare inspection, VA patterns of dispensing take-home opiates and monitoring patients on opiate therapy. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Dr. Clancy, you're shaking your head too. You're familiar with it?
Yes.
You've been moving forward on recommendations system-wide
Yes.
based on this? Now, earlier this week, I, along with Representative Reed Ribble of Wisconsin, had introduced legislation, the Veterans Pain Management Improvement Act, in part based on recommendations for the establishment of a pain management board at the business centers. If you had a chance to look at that legislation, do you have any opinion?
I have, and I actually think it's terrific. I would have one request, which I think would be very much in the spirit of this bill. I would hope that at least 2 members of that board would be veterans or family members, because I think that voice would be incredibly important.
It is part of the recommendations in the legislation that veterans and also family members, so that we get their direct input on pain management practices. I think that's terribly important as we do move forward. Dr. Clancy, I do want to commend you and Secretary McDonald for the responsiveness of the situation. And when this all came to light, we immediately went to Secretary McDonald asking for the formal investigation to take place. He didn't hesitate. He put you in charge. We had Deputy Secretary Sloan here, Sloan Gibson, a couple of weeks ago. We had a chance to brief with him as well. And I commend you for taking these allegations coming out of Tomah seriously and for the attention and the focus that they deserve. We look forward to working with you and the VA system to fix any problems that might exist. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Congressman Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. DeSantis, you were the director here at Tomah, right?
I'm currently
No, you were.
I am, yes.
And for how long in that capacity?
Since February of 2012.
And so the buck stops with you, right?
Yes.
You got these reports, didn't you? You knew what was being said about the Tomah VA. You knew what the employees inside were saying. They told you, right?
The retaliatory accusations did not come to me.
So you were clueless on this. You're the director, and you had no idea what was going on inside the Tomah VA by the hundreds of employees.
No, that's not correct. Actions that were brought to my attention, I took action to ensure that they were resolved.
Does it sound like you took action? Because I think Jason's parents would say you didn't take action. Or Mr. Bair's family would say you didn't take action. Ms. Clancy, you and I want to touch on this briefly. You and I spoke last week, and I agree, you can't diagnose Mr. Bair over the phone. You made a good point. But the fact that he sat in the Tomah VA for an hour and a half showing signs of a stroke, where doctors are on staff and nothing happened, they sent him on an hour drive to La Crosse? I mean, this is outrageous stuff. I mean, the original point you made is fine, but what are we doing to change the culture inside the VA system where if we got a veteran who's 74 years old who's showing signs of a stroke, we actually act? It's like out of a movie that you have slow-moving bureaucrats lumping around when a guy's dying. I mean, the Bair family should be absolutely outraged, and they absolutely are. What are we doing to change the culture inside the Tomah VA?
I think that this was less a culture change issue. First of all, the care was completely, totally unacceptable. I think that needs to be said. And the only thing, we cannot bring him back. I wish we could. But I am moved and inspired by his daughters being here today and speaking out against this, and I hope she doesn't stop.
But Dr. Clancy, I think what moved her more is if her father didn't die in vain.
No.
And that she knows that changes are going to be made inside.
Exactly.
There's not another slow-moving bureaucrat when someone else is in serious critical medical scenarios would actually move and help them.
We have staffing shortages in that urgent care unit, and we are working to rectify those. And we have also worked with nursing staff to identify some very clear deficiencies that were revealed as a result of that care.
I appreciate that. Did you read the IG report?
This one?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Have you substantiated the claims? I know I'm flipping the role here on you. Usually the IG is looking at what the VA is doing, but in your role, Dr. Clancy, in the VA, if you had seen that report, have you substantiated the claims? Would have you made that report public?
I don't think the results found in that report and reported were definitive. I think this is a problem with our process. Dr. Houlihan's practices have been reviewed by many external parties, and what actually prompted me to remove him from seeing patient care and make sure that he couldn't prescribe further, that his privileges were revoked along with the nurse practitioner in January, was a review commissioned by the network.
Okay, and just by the way, is Dr. Houlihan still employed at the VA?
He is, yes.
Is Mr. DeSanctis still employed?
Yes.
Miss Davis, who prescribed the lethal cocktail that killed Jason, she's still employed?
She is on administrative detail.
Is she
and is
employed?
under
Does she get a paycheck
investigation.
from the American taxpayer?
Yes.
She is?
Yes.
And I think that's what makes people angry here. People aren't held accountable, they're not fired.
No, I get that. If I could just say one thing, Congressman, the only thing that would be worse is if we had doubts about a practitioner, rushed through it, and a good attorney made sure that they had to keep a job, and you know what I'm saying, that the taxpayers had to pay them for long periods of time.
I'm going to Mr. Day, and I thank you for that. I don't know if we need, for evidence, we need emails, voicemails, text messages for our burden of proof. As a prosecutor, you could bring in, I was a former prosecutor, you can bring in witnesses that give compelling testimony, and juries can listen to that, and they can convict. And it sounds like you had pretty compelling evidence that was presented. Even Dr. Clancy found that it was a 2.5% higher rates of prescription drugs of 400 milligrams. Got that stat a little bit wrong. And that you have people who are notoriously frightened throughout the Tomah VA, and we kind of throw our hands up in the air and go, well, I guess there's nothing going on here. what I found, what my staff came back and said, listen, you didn't want to make that report public because you were more concerned about the employees of the Tomah VA than caring for the veterans in the VA system. That's what concerned them. And you actually told them that. And in regard to what you're doing now, making all the complaints public, I applaud you for that. But I got to tell you, the perception that we have of the IG is it's arrogant. You're annoyed that you're here. You're annoyed that you have these veterans looking to you to protect them from the VA system, and that you're being held to account publicly. That's frustrating them. They're frustrating you. I hope that I hope you take this back and you listen to the families that testified here and know that you may be the last line of defense for them as they tell their story to you privately. That you go and you work your hearts out for the men and women that raised their hand and served their country and fought for the freedom and the liberty that we enjoy. You owe that to them. And I hope that you leave this hearing and have a new, refreshed attitude and devotion and conviction to protect them for inadequate care in the VA system. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to pick up right from there, sorry, to the IG's office, but you said you have 50 to 60 reports a year. How many of those are administrative closed a year?
I publish about 50 reports a year. I have been closed over the last 3 years, about 20, 25 reports a year.
Over the last 3 years, and over the last 3 years...
So the average work published, the average output would be something like 50 reports published to the web, and something like 20, 25 reports admin closed.
Every year?
For the last 3 years.
So 50 a year reported? So 150 versus 25 get administrative closed. How many Freedom of Information requests do you get from members of Congress in order to get a report? In that same 3 year period, how many of those did you get?
I think this is the first time I can recall that.
So do you realize how extraordinary that is? The fact that this is a report, it was administratively closed, many of us have a lot of disagreements with the report, and that a member of Congress had to do a Freedom of Information request to get the report so we could get even this far. That's part of our frustration that we have. I served in oversight government reform. I dealt with the Inspector General's office on a lot of different issues. And you know, even now you're going to publish all of them. I'd say go one step farther. A little electronic file, you could send every report to every member of Congress, and we can decide whether or not it's a report that relates to our district, our committees, our constituency. So a member of Congress should never, ever again have to go to that extraordinary length to get a report from your office. So I just want to say that. Let me ask specifically, so I don't want to use up my time. Jason's case, specifically, his family said his opiates were not because of an injury. Specifically, your report said you did not find any documentation that opiates were used to treat PTSD. Can you tell me, was Jason's case one of them that you looked at when you did this report?
No.
It wasn't. Okay. Secretary, Dr. Clancy, I'm going to reiterate what Dr. Wall said and Chairman Miller. Please take a closer look at this on behalf of Jason's family, because clearly to get 14 or 15 different drugs, it wasn't even looked at in the report that wasn't released to us until we had to make a special request to get it. And at least we owe it to the family to figure out, so that for many other veterans, that if they're going to be prescribed something that's not something sufficient, or for the wrong case, which this seems to be, we need to at least do that.
I absolutely will, and I agree with you.
Yeah, and let me follow up too on when I talked to Mr. Ryan and the doctor at the end, I'm sorry, before the last panel, specifically when they talked about for those employees that are fairly new that have no protections, who want to be whistleblowers, but we don't really protect them. What are you doing specifically, not just here at Tomah, but across the system to figure that out? So that those kind of employees don't feel afraid or have to risk their jobs 2 weeks out from her year, or someone else have to resign because they're not being heard.
I will be looking into that. I had not recognized that previously as a serious weakness in our system. I will say I am utterly delighted, and I told Noelle Johnson that this morning, that she had found her way back to work in the VHA. So I consider that a real success. I'm hoping that we have more of that, that more whistleblowers have a path back, because they're incredibly vital to what we do.
And let me just ask this as perhaps a final question. So with what we're seeing here at Tomah, and it took to this point, you know, the extraordinary lengths to get a report, the extraordinary lengths to have family members sharing their stories. Now we're finding out potentially about additional deaths that weren't at law looked at through an Inspector General report. what are we doing system-wide to make sure that what happened here, not just here, that we got to fix it happening in Tomah, this doesn't happen in other places, because clearly, I wish every pharmacist was like the pharmacist that got fired, because she had the guts to stand up and do the right thing based on that. But what are we doing to make sure that we don't have to worry about someone who's willing to take that risk, to put their job on the line, to do the right thing?
So we're doing several things. First is that we have made it very clear, and we'll continue to make this clear again and again, because you have to make it clear again and again, that retaliation will not be tolerated, number one. Number two, whistleblowers and people who step forward and say there's something wrong here, who stop the line, right, to solve a problem, should be celebrated. We should be giving them awards. The Secretary and I have even discussed a Paul Revere Award. I don't know if that's the right name for it, but the bottom line is we need to celebrate that kind of feedback, because that's how we get better. That is a terrific thing. In terms of the opiates specifically, we have disseminated a new tool system-wide, which makes it much easier for frontline clinicians to have right in front of them how all their patients are doing on all aspects of care, including whether there's been an informed consent, the urine drug testing, what other medications they're on, and are they getting those medications from other parts of our system. So that's a good thing, and we're mandating that a much more focused effort take place system-wide, and we'll be following that quarterly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Pocan. I want to thank all of my colleagues here for participating. I want to thank all the members of the community for coming out and showing your concern, showing your support, being interested. I certainly want to thank our witnesses for your thoughtful testimony, both in the VA and the Office of Inspector General. I appreciate your comments, Dr. Clancy, that you have heard the stories and they've affected you. I think they've affected all of us. I want to thank the whistleblowers for your courage for coming forward. I want to thank future whistleblowers. We need this kind of information if we're going to solve these problems. But I really want to express my sincere gratitude and again condolences to the surviving families. I remember, I believe it was when I was talking to you, Marv, and Heather, and I asked you if you'd be willing to come public. Would you make the public case? Would you tell the story? And I said, if you do that, certainly my commitment would be to hopefully use those stories. If there's any good to come out of this tragedy, it's that your story would be used as a catalyst to enact real reform. So again, these tragedies never have to affect another veteran's family. So again, I just want to thank everybody for their involvement. Keep telling your stories. Let's keep showing the American people what we need to do, and you have a commitment with the people on this committee to do everything we can to solve these problems. The hearing record will remain open 15 days until April 14th at 5 p.m. For the submission of statements and questions to the record, this hearing is adjourned.
Okay, do we have, we're gonna. White scarf? Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
This program was recorded and presented by Chippewa Valley Community Television.
VA Hospital Investigation. Congress hears testimony on Tomah VA Hospital. Recorded Tomah, Wisconsin, March 30th, 2015.
Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cvctv.org.